The story begins outside the grand castle, where a crowd of curious citizens had gathered. All eyes were fixed on the royal balcony, awaiting the king's announcement. "At last, we've reached this day," the king proclaimed. "Some of you may have heard the rumors, but I am here to make it official. My son, Prince Lionel, is to wed the wise and graceful Lady Elfrida." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Are they really allowing him to marry her?" one woman whispered. "Doesn't red hair bring bad luck?" another added with a skeptical frown. Suddenly, a child's voice broke through the murmurs, shouting, "Kiss! Kiss!" But this was no fairy tale romance. Behind the king's words lay the truth. This was a calculated political alliance, a marriage built on convenience, not love. My name is Shina Komatsu. I was a professional makeup artist, traveling the globe, working behind the scenes of fashion shows and TV shoots. The cosmetics I created sold like wildfire. Life was perfect, flawless even. Or at least it should have been. Until everything changed. What is this? I've been reincarnated into a shoujo manga. Once I used to read religiously back in my past life, Sparkling Aquamarine, a classic romance where a sweet, ordinary girl falls for a prince, only for a jealous villainess to tear everything apart. Tragedy strikes, lives are lost, but in the end, love prevails. And me? I've been reborn as Elfrida Osterman, the red-haired noblewoman who dies in the story. No, this can't be real. It's too vivid to be a dream. And I think I'm hurt. Of all people, I ended up as her, the girl who gets executed. What kind of twisted fate is this? Okay, deep breath. Think, Sheena. What was I doing before this? I had just wrapped up a TV shoot. I remember walking with someone. Then someone pushed me. I fell down the stairs. I've dealt with rumors before, but I never imagined I'd actually be murdered. Footsteps. Someone's coming. Panicking, I lay back down in bed. "Excuse me, I've brought your meal," said a voice. "It must be lunchtime." "To thank you," I replied. The maid placed the tray down with a loud clatter, making me flinch. Something about her felt off. "I'll be going now," she said flatly. "Wait," I called after her. "Actually, I've been feeling a little unwell. My memory's a bit hazy. Could you tell me how I got injured?" She turned with a sinister smile. "Oh, it was nothing serious. You slipped on the stairs and hit your head." "Just slipped?" My heart sank. That's exactly how I died in my old life. Could it really be a coincidence? "Is that all?" she asked. "Yes, thank you." But inside, my mind was racing. I remember I had the manga Sparkling Aquamarine in my bag that day. And now, I've fallen into the exact storyline. The timeline matches. Everything lines up. Still, to live a life that ends in execution, that's beyond cruel. No, I won't accept that fate. I need to find answers, anything that could help. I began searching the room and soon came across a leather-bound journal. "What's this?" I muttered. It was Elfrida's diary. As I flipped through its pages, my heart ached. Entry after entry revealed her silent suffering, the scorn from nobles, the cruel treatment from maids, the bruises hidden behind discipline, her own sister's abuse, all because of her red hair, branded unlucky. So that's why the maid acted that way. "You poor thing," I whispered, clutching the diary tightly. "If no one else will love you, I will." Then something caught my eye. Wait, this date! This is 2 years before the main story begins? If that's true, then nothing is set in stone yet. The future can still change. That's it. I have time. Elfrida doesn't die until the story officially starts. I've got 2 whole years to rewrite her fate. If that's how it is, I'm not going to sit back and let the story play out. I'll survive. I'll rewrite this tragedy into a life worth living, a life full of joy, not despair. Just as determination filled me, the door creaked open again. A graceful woman stepped in, smiling. My, you're looking rather lively. This woman. The Osterman family was a respected noble house, known for building its vast fortune through generations of trade and logistics. The head of the family was Gael Osterman, a man of strong principles. His wife, Lady Lana, held the household together with grace. And then there was their eldest daughter, Monica Osterman. The very sight of her made my skin crawl. In the original story, she was merely a passing name, a background character with little importance. But now that I've read Elfried's diary, one thing is painfully clear. She's no background character. She's a monster. "How are you feeling?" Monica asked with a poised smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm feeling much better now, thank you," I answered politely. "I see," she said coolly. "Thank you for your concern." But before I could finish, her expression twisted into something vile. Honestly, it would have been better if you'd just died," she sneered. I froze. "Father and mother have been worried sick over you," she continued, her tone mocking. "As if having a redhead in the family wasn't shameful enough. At least when you were silent, things were peaceful. My little lessons worked wonders, didn't they?" Then she leaned in closer, her voice dripping with malice. "Say, how about doing us all a favor and taking another fall down the stairs? If it looks like an accident, no one would question it. Wouldn't everyone be so much happier without you?" I sat there stunned, my fists trembling. She wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. Then something inside me snapped. Slap! My hand struck her cheek with a satisfying crack. Her head whipped to the side, her eyes wide in disbelief. "Lady Monica!" a maid gasped, rushing to her aid. "Everyone would be happier if I were gone, huh?" I said, glaring at her. "That's the most disgusting, heartless thing I've ever heard." She was still frozen in shock. "Honestly, you're revolting." "What?" Monica gasped. "You think just because you're my sister you can say whatever you want? I'm telling Father." I took a breath, steadying my voice. "Let me rephrase that," I said coldly. "Telling someone to die, does that sound like something a true lady of House Osterman would say?" Her jaw dropped. "And while I'm at it," I continued, "you barge into someone's room without knocking, sit casually on the bed of an injured person. Didn't Mother ever teach you basic manners? Or have you conveniently forgotten?" You little—" Monica shouted, trying to lunge forward, but the maid held her back. "Please, Lady Monica, let's return to your room," the maid pleaded. In my mind, I couldn't help but smirk. Maybe I went too far, but all those online battles with trolls in my past life paid off big time. There was no point in submitting to Monica anymore. More than anything, I couldn't face the real Elfrieda if I let her story stay the same. "You red-haired freak!" Monica screeched. "How dare you talk back to me?" "Once again," I said, staring her down, "that foul mouth of yours is a stain on our family's name." "What's gotten into you?" she shouted. "Yesterday, you didn't even have the guts to look at me, and now— Ugh! I won't forget this. Don't think you'll get away with it, Elfrieda." As the door slammed behind her, I let out a long sigh and dropped onto the bed. "That was exhausting," I muttered. Maybe the slap was a little too much. Still, hopefully it would keep her off my back for a while. To think she said that kind of thing to Elfrieda every day before I came here. Unbelievable. I sighed again. This is depressing. I need a change of pace. Suddenly, an idea hit me. Shopping. That's it. Nothing lifts the mood like a bit of retail therapy. And if I could gather some intel while I was at it, even better. "Tomorrow I'll head into town," I said with renewed energy. "I wonder if they have beauty shops here, maybe even cosmetics." "Elsewhere." In a quiet corner of the palace barracks, a man was bathing. "Hey!" a voice called out. "It's time for patrol!" "I'm coming!" he replied calmly. Meanwhile, the pink-haired man was thinking, this guy and his obsession with baths, it's on another level. "All right, let's go," the man said. "Wow! So this is the royal capital of the Kingdom of Rivaria." Elfrida stood at the edge of a bustling stone-paved street, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the lively marketplace before her. The air buzzed with voices, clinking coins, and the scent of roasted nuts and fresh bread. Colorful banners fluttered above the cobblestone road, and vendors called out to passing customers, showcasing fabrics, trinkets, and spices from distant lands. So lively! What a wonderful place, she thought, her heart fluttering with cautious excitement. All right then, time to start gathering information. Though she still had no idea how, or even if, she could return to her original world, there was a small, lingering hope that this was all just a vivid dream. But even if it wasn't, now that I know what Elfrida endured in this life, I can't just turn my back on her. She began to walk, weaving through the crowd. For now, maybe I should head somewhere busy. Crowds are good for blending in and listening in. As she passed rows of shops, something in one of the windows caught her eye, a cosmetics display. Her footsteps halted and her eyes lit up. Inside the small shop window sat a delicate set of perfume bottles, powders, and lip tints, simple by her past life's standards, but beautifully crafted. She couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. It won't hurt to browse a little, she thought, her curiosity piqued. Right? She stepped inside the shop, the soft jingle of the bell above the door welcoming her in. The warm scent of herbs and floral oils greeted her as she wandered through the store. Not far away, a young man's gaze landed on Elfrida and entered the cosmetics store. His expression remained unreadable, eyes narrowing slightly. So, she's finally come into town. Later. I'm exhausted, Elfrida exhaled, rubbing her shoulders. The sun was already tilting past its peak. After wandering the capital for hours, her feet ached, but her mind buzzed with everything she had seen and heard. It's already past noon. Maybe it's time I head back, she thought. Still, she had gathered a good amount of useful information, details about Rivaria's social structure, noble lineages, local rumors, and even hints of the political tensions simmering beneath the surface. It had been a fruitful day, all things considered. I'd call that time well spent. As she turned a corner, something caught her attention. What's this? A large crowd had gathered just ahead. Voices murmured with curiosity, and people stood on their toes trying to get a better look. Why is there a crowd? What's going on? Intrigued, Elfrida made her way closer to see what the commotion was about. Is someone important arriving? Elfrida wondered. Standing at the edge of the growing crowd, she glanced around anxiously. The main road back home was now blocked by people pressing forward, eager to see what was happening. But I need to take this road to get back. I guess I've got no choice. Clearing her throat, she tried to squeeze through. Excuse me, coming through! But before she could make much progress, ouch! She stumbled as someone bumped into her shoulder. This isn't good. At this rate, I'll get crushed. Just then, a joyful cheer erupted from the crowd. They're here! The Royal Knights of Rivaria! Gasps of admiration swept through the street as the elite knights passed by, their silver armor gleaming in the sunlight. Lord Lionel, someone cried. He's so dreamy as always. The first prince of the kingdom, Lionel Claude, rode at the front of the formation, calm and composed. You're as popular as ever, Lord Lionel, one knight remarked with a chuckle. If you've got time to joke, Lionel replied coolly, use it to scan for any suspicious figures. As he passed, voices whispered in awe, a face worthy of a prince. And that's not all, he's brilliant, and the strongest swordsman in the kingdom. He's truly flawless. With Lord Lionel protecting us, we have nothing to fear. Lionel scanned the street with a sharp gaze. There are more people than expected today. Is it because I haven't patrolled this area in a while? He thought. At this rate, someone might get hurt. I need to step in. He raised his voice. Everyone, please step back. But his warning came too late. Kya! A girl shrieked as she lost her balance near the edge of the crowd. Without hesitation, Lionel dismounted and rushed forward. In one swift motion, he caught the girl before she hit the ground. Their eyes met. This hair, he thought, gazing down at the vibrant red locks in his arms. Elfrida's cheeks flushed bright pink. I'm sorry, she stammered, and before he could respond, she scrambled to her feet and fled into the crowd. Lionel remained still for a moment, stunned. Is that girl okay? One of the knights asked, watching her retreat. I hope she didn't hurt herself, said another. All right, everyone, please clear the area. Someone could get injured, a knight called out, ushering people away. Lord Lionel, are you all right? The knight beside him asked. Yeah, I'm fine, Lionel said, though his eyes lingered on the direction Elfrida had run, at the Osterman residence. Finally made it home, Elfrida said, slumping into a nearby chair. Her thoughts swirled. The man who caught me. That was him. No doubt about it. The first prince of Rivaria, the captain of the Royal Knights, the hero of sparkling aquamarine. Lionel Claude. Seeing him in person was overwhelming. He looked even more breathtaking than in the story. I ran away like a panicked squirrel. Maybe I should have stayed a bit longer. I probably won't get a chance like that again. Still, his popularity had been almost overwhelming. It was far more intense than how the manga had portrayed it. In the original story, Lionel meets the heroine and eventually marries her. Elfrida never crosses paths with him. Their worlds don't intersect, and maybe that was for the best. Lionel deserves to be happy with the heroine. I'm fine living quietly in the background. She let out a slow sigh. That said, I still don't have a clue how to avoid the execution. Just then, a knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Yes? She called. A maid entered with a small envelope in her hand. My lady, a letter has arrived for you. A letter? Elfrida blinked. For me? Yes, the maid confirmed. It's about the annual nobles' banquet, the one you've always been excluded from. Shall I mark you as absent again this year? Elfrida took the letter, her mind racing. As the redhead everyone looks down on, they'd be shocked to see me at a party like this. But maybe. This is my chance. If I can win over some influential nobles, I might be able to change my fate. No, she said aloud. Send my reply. I'll be attending. The maid froze. You going? Elfrida stood with confidence. Didn't you hear me? I said I'm going. In her mind, a spark of determination ignited. It's time to put those modern world social skills to use. This is the perfect moment to make a statement. She turned toward her wardrobe with purpose. Also, bring me every piece of jewelry in the house, right now. The maid stared, still stunned. I'm going to make the most dazzling debut high society's ever seen, Elfrida declared, her lips curling into a fearless smile. Although she had just declared she was ready, Elfrida found herself staring into the mirror with a frown. This rough skin, brittle hair, and frail body. There's no way I can show up to a party like this, she thought with a sigh. But then a spark lit in her eyes. Still, with all the beauty tricks I learned in my past life, this much is nothing. I can fix it within a week. With renewed determination, she smiled at her reflection. Time to polish those skills. It's self-care time. She began her transformation with a healthy diet, nourishing her body from the inside out. Her skincare routine was gentle, mindful of irritation, and focused on treating any blemishes. For her hair, she whipped up a DIY treatment using honey and oil. Every day she committed to stretching and strength training in secret. After each workout, she soaked in warm baths to boost her metabolism and let the sweat wash away her fatigue. 7 days later, she stood before the mirror again, stunned. "Yes, I look so much better," she beamed. "I can't believe the difference in just 1 week. This girl had potential from the beginning." Her joy overflowed. Self-care really is the best. She practically danced with excitement. "The hairstylist will be here soon, and the dress I ordered should arrive any minute. Everything's coming together perfectly." A gleam entered her eye as she looked at herself again. "Just you wait, nobles. I'll show up looking absolutely stunning and leave everyone speechless." That evening, at the grand event, Elfrida stepped out of the carriage in a breathtaking blue gown that hugged her figure with elegance. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A gentleman extended his hand politely. "May I take your hand?" "Thank you," she replied with grace. She moved with the poise of a noblewoman, drawing every eye. "Hey, isn't that the redhead people were talking about?" murmured someone nearby. Spotting a couple engaged in conversation, Elfrida approached them with a polite smile. "Excuse me for interrupting." The woman barely glanced at her, her tone dismissive. "What is it?" "Oh, nothing really. I just wanted to compliment your dress. Is it the newest design from the boutique on First Street?" The couple blinked. "You know our shop?" "I stopped by the other day to look at hats. I didn't realize you two were the owners." The man smiled. "All the boutiques in that district are under our name." "That explains the consistent style and craftsmanship," Elfrida added warmly. "You really noticed that?" he asked, clearly pleased. "Of course! Especially the lace peeking from the sleeves. It's exquisite." The woman's smile turned sharp. Inwardly, she sneered. "So the redhead thinks she's some kind of expert now? Let's see how far that shallow knowledge goes." With a cunning gleam, she said, "Since you seem so fashionable, I'd love to hear your thoughts on upcoming noblewomen's trends." "Trends, you say?" Elfrida echoed. "Yes, though I suppose that might be too advanced for someone who's been cooped up at home," the woman added with a mocking smile. Elfrida smiled politely. "You're not wrong, but trends aren't just something that appear, they're created." That caught everyone's attention. "You begin with an idea, then find the right person to wear it. Say, a well-known young lady wears a perfectly tailored design to a party. And it turns heads, setting the trend," the man mused aloud. "Exactly. That's why what you want to make trendy is the most important factor." "I'm sorry I couldn't give a more specific answer," Elfrida said humbly. "No, not at all. That's a refreshing perspective. I like it," the man said, clearly impressed. The woman conceded, her tone softer. "I apologize for being so critical. You're quite knowledgeable." "Not at all. I enjoyed the conversation," Elfrida replied graciously. Internally, she smiled. "Seems like the instincts I gained from work paid off. I'm so glad." Suddenly, a voice called out from the gathering crowd. "You there, young lady. I overheard your thoughts on fashion. They were quite intriguing. I'd love to hear more." Others began to whisper, "Is it true red hair brings misfortune?" Realization dawned on Elfrida, and her heart sank. "So that's why they're interested. How disgusting. I need to get out of here." With a composed smile, she said, "Excuse me, I need to touch up my makeup," and quietly stepped away. A few hours later. Finally, some peace and quiet. Elfrida stood alone in the garden balcony, letting the cool night air wash over her. After the whirlwind of socializing, she needed a moment to breathe. "That fiasco really wore me out," she muttered under her breath. Still, she had managed to pull herself together and return to the ballroom with grace. Surprisingly, mingling with the nobles hadn't been as dreadful as she imagined. In fact, she'd made a few acquaintances. Some guests even voiced doubts about the old legend tied to her red hair. She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I'm tired." but I actually had fun. In her heart, something stirred. It's been a while since I was reincarnated, but tonight, for the first time, I feel truly fulfilled. She hadn't felt this light in so long, but the warmth in her chest froze the moment the door behind her creaked open. She turned around. Lionel. Their eyes locked, both visibly startled. Before either could speak, another voice broke the moment. "Please wait, Lord Lionel." A sharp, feminine voice called from behind. A noblewoman entered in a flurry of silk and perfume, her steps brisk and purposeful. "I've been looking for you all night. You're supposed to be with me." She paused mid-sentence as her gaze landed on Elfrida. A flicker of disgust danced in her eyes. "There you are," she said, venom laced beneath her sweet tone. Elfrida's heart sank. No way. That face, that voice, it can't be. The shock hit her like a slap. Misha Tark, the villainess from the original story. Misha's eyes narrowed, her lips curling in disdain. "That filthy redhead, still as revolting as ever," she spat. "What business do you have with Lord Lionel?" Tension crackled through the grand hall like lightning before a storm. Misha was the first to confront him, her voice cutting through the silence. She demanded to know why he had rushed off, why he had gone to meet her. Though the question was not shouted, it struck hard, heavy with implication. Elfrida, standing nearby, felt her blood run cold. In her mind, alarm bells rang. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a dangerous one. Misha's suspicion was drawing eyes, and those eyes could become gallows. Elfrida knew too well how quickly rumors turned to ruin. If she said the wrong thing or even made the wrong move, her fate might be sealed. And then, with a calm that belied the moment's weight, Lionel stepped forward. His voice was measured, steady. He didn't make excuses or attempt to deflect the accusation. Instead, he revealed the truth in the simplest of terms. The woman they questioned him about, Elfrida, was not a secret lover, nor a scandal waiting to erupt. She was his fiancée. The words, though softly spoken, landed like thunder. Curiosity turning into shock, suspicion into confusion. The storm had not passed, but its winds had changed direction. Elfrida blinked, her mind stalling as Lionel's words echoed through the air. Fiancé? Had she heard that correctly? Her heart skipped, then stumbled. How? Why me? The declaration struck her harder than Misha's glare ever could. Misha, stunned but far from silent, stepped forward with venom in her eyes. Disbelief radiated from her expression, and though her words were meant to dismiss and insult, their meaning was clear. She considered Elfrida far beneath the title Lionel had just bestowed. But Lionel stood his ground, voice unwavering. He claimed no jest, no misunderstanding. According to him, they were deeply in love. Elfrida's thoughts reeled. Does he even know my name? Has Lord Lionel always been this reckless with the truth? His words, so effortlessly spoken, were absolute fiction. And yet, why would he lie? This wasn't how the scene had played out in the original novel, she remembered. Misha's confrontation in the book had been fierce, yes, but this was something else, sharper, more desperate. Could it be that Lionel, rather than defending her, was trying to provoke Misha? Did he perhaps loathe her more than he'd ever let on? Whatever the truth was, Misha's voice cracked again, accusatory, trembling, a mixture of disbelief and pride. She couldn't accept it. She claimed it must be a lie meant to push her away. Elfrida, still caught in the whirlwind, knew one thing with certainty. She had to survive this chaos. Lionel wasn't just any nobleman. He was the first prince of the kingdom. Misha, for all her pride and status, couldn't openly oppose him without consequence. That meant there was only one path forward. Drawing a breath, Elfrida stepped forward, her voice, steady yet tinged with hesitation, carried through the silence that followed the storm. She backed up his story, fabricating details that would bind the lie in silk. She spoke of exchanged letters, secret meetings born of affection, and the impossibility of going public due to Lionel's royal obligations. She even asked for forgiveness, bowing her head as though burdened by love. It was a performance born of instinct. If this farce were to be her lifeline, she would grasp it with both hands. The room remained tense, but Misha wasn't done. Her voice rang out again, sharp and scornful. She dismissed Elfrida entirely, her words laced with disdain, not even hiding her prejudice. To Misha, nothing that came from the mouth of a redhead was worth believing. She stepped forward then, slowly, deliberately, closing the distance between herself and Lionel. With a confidence born of privilege, she placed a hand on his chest, a move both intimate and confrontational. Her voice dropped, low but piercing. Though no one else could hear the words clearly, her intent was unmistakable. She was calling the entire scene a fabrication. She accused him of using Elfrida, of spinning lies for some hidden gain. Her eyes never left his, challenging him to deny it. Across the room, Elfrida watched in silence, heart pounding in her chest. Her hands were clenched at her sides. This is it, she thought. The moment everything either falls apart or holds together. All that remained was for Lionel to go along with the story, to stand by what he had claimed. "Please," she pleaded silently, "please, Lionel, just follow through." For a breathless second, he didn't move. Then, with deliberate calm, Lionel reached up and removed Misha's hand from his chest. His touch was firm, not cruel, but final. Without a word to her, he turned and drew Elfrida close, placing a protective hand around her shoulders. The gesture was unmistakable, public, powerful, and personal. He reaffirmed what he had declared before. No matter how many times he had to say it, the truth would not change. Elfrida was his rightful fiancée. And for the first time since the storm began, Elfrida felt the faintest shift in the air, as though the tide had just turned in her favor. Misha's composure cracked. Her voice rose, sharp with disbelief and fury, refusing to let go of the unraveling thread. She accused them both again, accused Lionel of being blind, accused Elfrida of being unworthy. Even if their story were true, she cried, it didn't change the fact that Elfrida bore the red hair of legend. That alone in her eyes tainted everything. She didn't stop there. She reminded them that Elfrida's family, while noble, held only a middling rank. To someone of Misha's stature, they were barely a step above the commoners. She saw Elfrida as a stain, a blemish against the proud name of House Claude. Her words were cruel, calculated to wound. Elfrida felt her throat tighten. If I let her keep going, she thought desperately, this entire scene will spiral into something I can't recover from. But before she could act, Lionel moved first. His voice remained calm, almost too calm for the weight of what he said. He acknowledged her point, even her family's opinion, but he offered her a solution that froze the blood in the room. If she truly believed Elfrida unworthy of standing beside him, she was welcome to take that complaint not to him, but directly to the king himself. The implication was crystal clear. The matter had already passed beyond her reach. Misha faltered. Her voice, which had moments ago carried so confidently, broke apart. She stammered for a response, but no argument came. And just like that, Lionel ended the conversation. With polite finality, he declared the matter resolved and turned away, guiding Elfrida with him. No further explanation, no room for negotiation. Misha stood there, stunned. Her mouth moved, but no sound followed. The confrontation that had begun with such fury had ended in silence, and none of it had gone as she imagined. In her mind, questions clashed in chaos. Wait, what is this? What on earth just happened? I managed to survive. For now. The situation had been diffused, but the truth remained a fragile thing. One careless word and everything could collapse. Lionel had helped her, yes, but something about his expression lingered in her mind. There was a shadow in his eyes, not regret exactly, but a heaviness that hadn't been there before. He probably didn't expect it to escalate that far either, she thought. Still, he hadn't betrayed her, and for now, that was enough. Before leaving, she knew she had to speak with him. She thanked him for defending her, and he accepted it with quiet ease. To him, prejudice based on hair color was absurd. His tone made it clear. He hadn't acted out of chivalry or obligation. He simply didn't tolerate cruelty. But then came the apology. He admitted, almost awkwardly, that he hadn't meant to involve her in such a mess, and for a second she saw it, the glimpse of the man behind the title. She reassured him, keeping her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. Then he asked the question she had half expected, yet still wasn't fully ready to answer. Why had she gone along with the lie? She paused, then offered only a sliver of truth. If he truly wanted to know, he would have to meet her tomorrow night, quietly and in secret, at the Osterman estate. She stepped into the carriage, offering a faint smile before the door closed behind her. As the wheels began to turn and the distance grew, she didn't look back. But Lionel did. He remained still in the courtyard, watching as her carriage disappeared into the dusk, his thoughts unreadable, his silence louder than anything he'd said. Back in the quiet of her room, Elfrida sank into the edge of her bed, the weight of the evening pressing down on her all at once. The adrenaline had long faded, leaving behind only the raw ache of uncertainty. She muttered to herself, the words barely audible. But in truth, they weren't for anyone else. I messed up. Now that the chaos had settled, she had time to truly think. And the reality hit harder than she expected. By aligning herself with Lionel, even in name only, she had already veered the story off its intended path. The original timeline was no longer intact. Marriage to the first prince wasn't part of her plan. It would change everything. But the moment she acted to avoid her own execution, she had set that change in motion. There was no use pretending otherwise. Still, one thing weighed heaviest on her conscience. She didn't want to stand in the way of Lionel's true romance. The love story she remembered from the original tale. It wasn't hers to claim. And no matter how twisted the current situation had become, she had no desire to steal that ending. After returning from the party, she had spent the entire night in restless thought, pacing, writing, and tearing up plans. She tried again and again to find a path forward that would keep her alive, without ruining the future that was supposed to unfold. No matter how she turned the pieces, the answer remained the same. She didn't like it. In fact, it left a bitter taste in her mouth. But survival had a price, and now she was prepared to pay it. Evening had arrived without warning. Elfrida hadn't realized how much time had passed. She had been lost in thought for hours, so much so that the entire day had slipped through her fingers. If Lionel had truly accepted her invitation, he would be arriving tonight. The thought alone stirred a quiet nervousness in her chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. It wasn't like her to be so unsettled by a guest, even one as significant as the first prince. Yet she couldn't deny it, his presence, his unexpected cooperation, and the role he was now playing in her life had begun to shift things within her, just slightly out of place. And still, another thought intruded, the possibility of encountering her again. Misha Tark. The name alone carried weight. Whispers, glances, silence. The only daughter of the Tark family, one of the most powerful noble houses in all of Rivaria. Their influence stretched far beyond court politics. For generations, they had ruled the land as massive estate holders, amassing wealth and loyalty that no crown could easily challenge. Misha, for all her grace and delicate beauty, wielded her family's influence like a sharpened blade. Outrageously self-centered and used to the world bending around her, she had little patience for resistance. Most simply did as she commanded. Those she disapproved of were quietly pushed aside, erased from noble circles as if they had never existed. And once, briefly, dangerously, Elfrida had caught Misha's attention. It had not ended well. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. That wasn't the path she wanted to walk again. But now wasn't the time to dwell on past confrontations, not with the night drawing near. There was nothing left to plan, nothing more she could say or do. All that remained was to wait, and hope that Lionel would come. The first stars had begun to appear in the sky when Elfrida finally gave up hope. Night had fallen completely, the air turning cool and quiet, and with it, her expectations sank. She whispered to herself, barely audible, a quiet acknowledgement of what she already suspected. He wasn't coming. It wasn't surprising. Why would someone of Lionel's status actually heed the invitation of someone like her? In the rigid structure of noble society, everything was determined by rank and birth, and hers was far beneath his. Their brief cooperation at the party had likely been nothing more than a moment of convenience. She had taken a risk, and it had failed. That much was clear now, which meant her plan, using Lionel's name as protection to avoid the execution route, was already starting to unravel. She would need a new approach, quickly. Perhaps she could try again in town, gather more information discreetly, find another way to navigate her path without relying on him. Her thoughts turned toward her usual routes, contacts, and disguises. But then, just as she was preparing to act, a faint sound caught her attention, a soft scratch against the door. Her body tensed, instincts sharpened. Quietly, she rose and moved toward it, fingers hesitating just for a moment on the handle before pulling it open. And there he was. Lionel stood in the dim hallway, expression unreadable, his presence like a spark in the dark. Her eyes widened, a breath catching in her throat. But before she could speak, his hand moved gently over her mouth. He cautioned her in a hushed voice. If anyone saw them now, the consequences could be unpredictable. Only once the door was securely closed behind him did he release her and step further into the room. He explained himself calmly. He had arrived, as promised, but without knowing where she was, he had resorted to slipping past the estate's guards and searching on his own. Elfrida's mind raced. I forgot to tell him where I'd be. I completely messed up. Embarrassment prickled at her cheeks, but even so, he had come. Despite the risk, despite the confusion, he had still chosen to find her. And in that simple truth, something shifted in her thinking. If he was willing to come this far, then there was still a chance. The path wasn't closed yet. There was still room for negotiation. Elfrida hesitated, standing just a few steps away from Lionel, the words in the tip of her tongue. She had meant to bring it up gently, to clarify the fiancé's act. But before she could finish her sentence, Lionel interrupted her. He dismissed the need for explanations and instead reached for something in his pocket, holding it out to her. Instinctively, she extended her hand. A necklace. She looked down at it, confused, but said nothing as he placed it gently in her palm. It was a token of thanks, he explained, a gesture of appreciation for her willingness to go along with the farce. But then he added something more. When it came to Misha, he said, he planned to tell her the truth. Elfrida froze. So that's how he intended to resolve things, cleanly, with honesty and nobility, just like the male lead he was always meant to be, polite, principled, and entirely in character. But even so, something felt off. His expression didn't reflect confidence or clarity. There was no eagerness in his eyes. If anything, he seemed tired. She processed it quickly. Very Lionel, she thought. But from the look on his face, he's not thrilled either. Then, before the moment could drift into silence, he offered another remark, an apology, wrapped in a gift. He gestured toward the necklace again, calling it a symbol of regret. Its value, he assured her, was guaranteed. But Elfrida's mind was already racing. She had a better plan. It was bold, bordering on reckless, but it could benefit them both. She made her proposal without hesitation, a contract marriage. Lionel blinked, startled. The words clearly caught him off guard. She explained calmly, a marriage in name only, bound by mutual agreement. From what she could gather, Misha wasn't the only woman pursuing him. Countless noble daughters probably saw him as a prize. With a contract marriage in place, he could avoid their attention without offending anyone. He admitted she wasn't wrong, and in turn she laid out her motives. Being seen at the side of the first prince would change the way people looked at her hair. The color that once brought her mockery might be rebranded as rare, even noble, just by association. He considered her words, nodding slightly. Her logic was sound, practical even, but in her heart she knew the truth. Her real reason had nothing to do with public perception. It was about protection, shielding herself from Misha's wrath, from political schemes, from the cruel fate that loomed behind every misstep. She softened her tone, acknowledging the imbalance. From his perspective, there wasn't much to gain. Still, she hoped he would consider it. Because for her, this wasn't just a strategy. It was survival. Without hesitation, Lionel gave his answer. It was a simple, "All right," but to Elfrida, it struck like thunder. She hadn't expected him to agree so quickly, especially not to something as radical as a contract marriage. But then again, he was the captain of the Royal Knights. Decisive, sharp, unshaken. She barely hid her shock, though inside, she was reeling. This wasn't just agreement. It was trust, however limited, from the kingdom's most admired man. Lionel, ever composed, confessed the truth behind his choice. The women chasing after him had become a nuisance. Her offer, as bold as it was, gave him a way out. He spoke casually, running a hand through his hair, as though unburdening himself, but behind his calm demeanor was a quiet exhaustion that even Elfrida could sense. She thought to herself how even someone as stunning as Lionel wasn't spared from the harshness of this world. Looks came with a price, constant attention, relentless expectations. Then, with a dry remark, he reminded her of their first encounter, how she had slapped his hand away and fled. A test of spirit, perhaps, one she'd unknowingly passed. Her mind raced back to that moment in the market, realizing he had pieced it together. He knew. Still, she hesitated. Despite being the one to propose it, she worried aloud. Could a first prince really afford to enter such a sham of a marriage? Would this truly be all right? Lionel made things clear. This union would be in name only, an agreement sealed by circumstance, not emotion. They would each live freely, bound only by the shared duty to protect the honor of the Claude family. No scandals, no interference, no stepping over lines. And that, Elfrida could agree to. After all, she had her own secret plan. In 2 years, the real heroine of the story would arrive. When that time came, Elfrida intended to quietly fade into the background. No attachments, no regrets. Lionel extended his hand, offering a deal forged not by love, but by necessity. She took it without hesitation, gripping it firmly despite the tremble in her fingers. A quiet smile played on her lips. The contract was sealed. For now, they were partners, and for Elfrida, that was more than enough. With their agreement sealed, the next step was planning. Lionel wasted no time. Strategy was second nature to him, after all. They both understood the stakes. This contract marriage couldn't be known, at least not yet. The palace was a nest of sharp ears and sharper tongues. To keep suspicions low, they discussed living arrangements. A secluded villa owned by the state came to mind, remote enough to offer privacy, yet official enough to seem legitimate. Elfrida agreed. Starting a marriage while living apart would raise too many questions. Appearances mattered. Then came the topic of wedding rings. She brought it up gently, knowing how odd it would seem for a married couple to be without them. But Lionel grimaced at the idea. For a man who lived by the sword, he considered anything unnecessary a distraction, rings included. Still, he asked if she wanted one. Elfrida thought honestly. The ring held no emotional meaning for her, no symbol of love or connection, but it was part of the image they needed to maintain. If wearing one helped sell the illusion, then it was worth it. In the end, they agreed to leave the matter open, deciding they'd choose rings when the time felt right. Then came the matter of family. Informing their parents was inevitable. Elfrida hesitated for a moment, her thoughts drifting to the king. Was it really wise to proceed without royal consent? But Lionel reassured her. He wouldn't have accepted the proposal without a plan in place. Timing was everything, and the king's involvement would come later. For now, he'd start with her family. She suggested a visit in 2 days, midday, when the whole family would be gathered. Lionel agreed without complaint. Always efficient, always focused. As the conversation ended, Lionel moved to leave. Not through the door, of course. That would be far too ordinary. He stepped toward the open window, light on his feet, cloak fluttering as he leapt down in one smooth motion. Elfrida stood there, blinking in amusement. The first prince of the kingdom, leaping from windows like a rogue in a romance novel. He was far more entertaining than she had imagined. The day had finally arrived, noon, just as planned. Elfrida stood before the door of the parlor, behind which her family was gathered. With steady hands and a nervous heart, she knocked. Inside, the atmosphere was typical. Light conversation and tea shared among her parents and sister. But everything shifted the moment Elfrida stepped in. Her presence was met with visible disdain from her eldest sister, and their father's mood soured instantly. The weight of their disapproval hung thick in the air. Still, Elfrida pressed on, summoning the courage she had gathered for this very moment. She announced that there was someone she wanted them to meet, and at her signal, Lionel entered. Gasps filled the room as the family recognized him. The shock on their faces was unmistakable. Their father was shaken, stumbling over his words. Her mother stood frozen in disbelief, and Monica, her sister, looked as if the world had suddenly tilted. Then came the revelation. Elfrida, calm and resolute, made her declaration. She intended to marry Prince Lionel. The room fell into stunned silence, but it was Lionel's next move that truly changed everything. Stepping forward with dignity and strength, he formally asked for their blessing. With a composed yet passionate demeanor, he acknowledged their concerns, admitted his own shortcomings, and pledged his unwavering resolve to protect and support Elfrida. He spoke not only of love and commitment, but of strength, honor, and trust. The family was left speechless. The air had shifted from disdain and confusion to a charged uncertainty. A storm of emotions swirled in their hearts, especially in Monica's, as they struggled to process what had just unfolded before their eyes. The room was still for a moment. "Well, there's absolutely no problem, right, dear?" Elfrida's mother said, nudging her husband. "Yes, of course," he agreed, still trying to collect himself. "But how exactly did you two meet?" "We met at a party some time ago," Lionel replied. "Oh my, Elfrida, why didn't you tell us sooner?" her mother said. "Would you have believed me if I had?" Elfrida replied, a faint smile on her lips. "No way." Monica fumed silently. How did that useless girl end up like this? And with the first prince, no less. You're supposed to be beneath me." "With all due respect, Your Highness," Monica said, forcing a polite tone. My sister. She can't do anything without me. I fear she would only be a burden to you. She still requires discipline. I say this with a heavy heart, but perhaps it would be best to reconsider this marriage. And that hair of hers. It's said to bring misfortune. I worry about the shame she might bring upon the Claude family. Monica, what are you saying? Their father snapped. Lionel's smile faded, his tone sharpening. I understand your concern, but if hair color alone were enough to endanger the royal family, then we'd be far weaker than we appear. Or, are you suggesting the most powerful kingdom lacks the strength to protect itself? I didn't mean it that way, Monica stammered. Please, don't hold back. Feel free to speak your mind, Lionel said coolly, his presence suddenly overwhelming. Monica shrank back, unable to speak another word. Her mother quickly stepped in. Silence, Monica. I deeply apologize for our daughter's rudeness, Your Highness. No need, Lionel replied. I'm not offended. After that scolding, Elfrida thought, I doubt she'll be speaking again any time soon. And we even got their blessing. First obstacle cleared. Outside the house. Thank you for earlier, Elfrida said softly. You saved me again. I only stated the truth, Lionel replied. Don't worry about it. Just remember, we have the royal audience tomorrow. Don't be late. I'll do my best, Elfrida smiled. See you then, Lionel said as he stepped into his carriage and departed. Elfrida exhaled, then turned back toward the house. All right, time to get ready for tomorrow. The following day. Elfriede stood frozen, her eyes wide as they took in the towering structure before her. This is Prince Lionel's home. She swallowed hard. I knew it was a castle, but this is beyond anything I imagined. It's enormous. The grand spires pierced the clouds, and the gates alone felt taller than any building she'd ever seen. Her heart pounded. And now I'm about to meet the king and queen who live here. She gripped her dress tightly. This is bad. I'm more nervous than I was during my first stage performance. Sorry, did I keep you waiting? She turned at the sound of his voice. Ah, Lionel, no, I just got here too, she replied quickly, her nerves barely hidden beneath her smile. He studied her face for a moment, then said, You mentioned you were going to brush up on noble etiquette the other day. Oh, don't worry, I've drilled it all into my head, she said with a proud nod. I see, that's good. My father can be very strict. One wrong move and, well, you might lose your head, literally, Lionel said, deadpan. What? Elfrida froze. Just kidding. That didn't sound like a joke at all. She panicked internally, her forced smile twitching at the corners. The butler greeted them with a formal bow. Welcome back, Your Highness. Thank you for the warm welcome. Please guide us to my father's room, Lionel replied with calm confidence. As you wish. With that, the butler led the way. Compared to her modest upbringing, the grandeur of the royal welcome overwhelmed Elfrida. So this is what life among royalty feels like, she thought, glancing around the majestic halls. This way, please, the butler said, gesturing to a tall, ornate door. Thank you, Lionel nodded politely. I'll take my leave then, the butler added with another bow before stepping away. Elfrida took a deep breath. This is it, she whispered. I've already informed him of the situation, but he'll likely want to hear it again, Lionel said reassuringly. Leave the talking to me. I'm counting on you, Elfrida replied, trying to steady her nerves. Lionel knocked gently. From inside, a voice responded. You may enter. Excuse us, Lionel said, as they stepped into the room. Thank you for coming, said the king, seated with an air of command. I've been waiting, Lady Elfrida. Elfrida curtsied, her heart pounding under the weight of his presence. So this is what it feels like to stand before a king, she thought. It's an honor to meet you, Your Majesty. I am Elfrida of House Osterman. I'm truly grateful for this opportunity to—" Before she could finish, a cheerful voice interrupted. "Big brother!" A young boy ran forward and threw his arms around Lionel's legs. "Welcome home!" "Mark!" Lionel laughed. "Mark?" Elfrida blinked. "Is that the same Mark? His half-brother? I remember they were close in the original story." "Mark, not now!" the Queen gently scolded. "Apologies, he just adores his brother." "Please don't worry," Elfrida replied kindly, feeling her anxiety lift slightly. "Honestly, that helped calm me down." "I'm Natalie," the Queen said with a warm smile. "Thank you for joining us today. If you'll come with me," she gestured toward the sitting area. Elfrida nodded. "Of course." The four of them moved to the nearby couches and sat, the weight of what was to come hanging in the air. "I've heard about it before," the King said, his gaze steady. "But let me hear the details directly from you two." Lionel speaks with confidence. "Yes, Your Majesty. I, Lionel Claude, wish to marry Elfrida, the second daughter of the Osterman family. We first met at a party." Elfrida, sitting beside him, silently rooted for him. "I'm counting on you, Lionel," she thought, trying to keep calm. The King nodded slowly. "I see." His presence filled the room, and Elfrida couldn't help but feel the tension. This is so awkward. The King continued, his tone more serious now. "You are aware of the legend surrounding red hair, aren't you?" Lionel didn't hesitate. "Yes, of course I know it." "And you still wish to marry her?" the King asked, testing his resolve. "Yes," Lionel answered firmly. "I believe this kingdom won't fall apart because of some old legend. Isn't that right, Father?" A low, amused humph escaped the King's lips. "Of course. Very well. I grant permission for the marriage to the Osterman family." A warm smile spread across the Queen's face. "I look forward to working with you, Elfrida." Elfrida blinked, still overwhelmed. The King looked between his son and his future daughter-in-law. "Lionel has never shown much interest in romance, and now he's fallen in love with someone. As a father, not a king, I want to support my son." Lionel turned to him, voice thick with emotion. "Father." "Now that it's decided," the Queen said, clapping her hands together with excitement. "Let's begin the wedding preparations right away." "Of course," the King added with a rare spark of joy. "We'll make it a national affair." Lionel turned to his younger brother with a smile. "Will you help Mark?" But when everyone glanced his way, Mark was fast asleep, curled up in a chair. With light laughter filling the air, the meeting drew to a close. "We'll inform you of the ceremony details soon," the King said. "Lionel, escort her." "Yes," Lionel responded. Lionel offered his arm to Elfrida, and the two began walking down the grand hallway. Behind them, the King's sharp eyes followed every step they took, his expression unreadable. A few months passed. The royal wedding between Lionel and Elfrida became a grand event. Thanks to Lionel's excellent reputation among nobles and citizens alike, most people celebrated their union with joy and excitement. The kingdom was abuzz with festivities. Elfrida thought married life had begun smoothly, but not everyone shared the joy. Hidden in the shadows of the palace, Misha's thoughts burned with resentment. Her gaze cold and voice silent, she made a vow to herself. She would never forgive Elfrida. In her heart, Lionel was hers, and no one else's. The marriage, originally planned as a contract for mutual benefit, had now become official. With both families having given their blessings and met in person, everything was moving forward without any issues, for now. 1 month ago, Elfrida had taken the initiative to handle the party invitations, and Lionel agreed, trusting her with the task. As they discussed the next item on their list, furnishing their new home, Elfrida expressed concern over the cost of starting from scratch. To ease the burden, she offered to bring pieces from her old room. But when Lionel realized what kind of room she had lived in, he was visibly surprised. He insisted on furnishing everything himself, unwilling to let her bring anything that didn't match the dignity of their new life. Though she initially resisted, feeling it was too much to accept, she eventually agreed, seeing how serious he was. Still, as she stood in the room prepared for her, her eyes wide with disbelief, she couldn't help but think. She hadn't expected it to be this luxurious. Elfrida stood frozen as Lionel entered the room behind her. The furniture had all been moved in, elegant, polished, and far more luxurious than she ever imagined. He apologized for arriving late, noticing how she'd been quietly admiring the new space. She thanked him, surprised by the extravagance, and promised to repay him somehow. Lionel, amused, took it as a favor she owed. Then her gaze fell on the large bed at the center of the room. She commented on its size, and Lionel casually confirmed it was only fitting if two people were going to share it. Elfrida, caught off guard, blushed. The reality of sharing a bed hit her with unexpected intensity. Lionel reassured her that it was just for appearances, nothing more, but she silently wished he had warned her ahead of time, if only to mentally prepare. Changing the subject, Lionel asked her something that had been on his mind. He'd noticed her previous room had been unusually filthy compared to the rest of the house. Elfrida, unwilling to dive into her complicated family background, offered a simple explanation. The ceiling had leaked. Lionel accepted it without prying further. Before the moment grew too awkward, he mentioned that the maid was outside waiting, ready to prepare the bath for their new room. Elfrida welcomed the news, grateful for a distraction and eager to move forward in this unfamiliar, luxurious space. While sitting on the bed, Elfrida quietly tended to herself, her fingers brushing over faint scars she hadn't noticed before. Her heart sank. Now that I'm looking closely, these aren't just scratches. They look like burn marks, boiling water maybe. The realization hit hard. These must be from Monica, but these ones, she probably didn't even get proper treatment. A chill ran down her spine. I have to hide this. What if he sees and starts asking questions? What if he suspects my family and wants to annul the marriage? Just then, Lionel stepped out of the bath, steam following him into the room. "I'm done with my bath," he said casually. Elfrida looked up and froze. Whoa! He's practically half naked. Her face flushed instantly, and she turned her head away. I don't know where to look. Could you wear your bathrobe properly?" Lionel blinked in confusion, then looked down. Sorry. I'm usually around the guys, so I didn't even think about it." Elfrida offered an awkward smile, cheeks still pink. That startled me. Shoujo manga worlds are terrifying. I have to stay alert. "I'll grab some clothes from the other room," Lionel muttered, hurrying away. But before Elfrida could catch her breath, something small moved near her feet. She gasped. "Huh? What, a kitten?" A fluffy little cat blinked up at her, completely unfazed. She scooped it up. "What is this adorable little cat? So cute!" She cradled it in her arms, eyes sparkling. The kitten had a collar. "Maybe it belongs to one of the maids," she wondered aloud. "Lionel, do you know anything about this?" Lionel paused, his face turning stiff. "That's my cat." Elfrida tilted her head. "Did something happen?" He hesitated. "No, I just thought I'd hidden him well enough that no one would find him." "Huh? Why would you hide a kitten?" she asked, confused. "Because if people knew, they'd be disappointed. They'd think less of me." Her brows furrowed. "Did someone tell you that?" "My old tutor once said, the more things you care about, the more weaknesses you'll have." He looked away, eyes shadowed. But when I saw him shivering in the cold, I couldn't leave him there. I see, she said softly. The whole a man should act like a man thing, huh? In her mind, the gears turned. In this world, gender roles are strictly defined. Even if I find it twisted, here it's just normal. I bet there are so many people suffering silently like Lionel without even realizing it. I know I can't change the entire world's values, but maybe I can make a difference for the people around me. She smiled brightly. Then it's decided. Let's keep the cat here in this room. We'll say he's mine. You don't mind? Lionel asked, genuinely surprised. Not at all, but I do understand where you're coming from, she said gently. So just wait until you feel ready to talk about it. Sound good? Lionel was speechless, staring at her in quiet awe. Well, now that that's settled, I'd better get a bed for this little kitty. Want to sleep with me tonight, little one? She cooed, cuddling the cat. Lionel watched her with a small smile, warmth softening his features. She really is something else. The next morning, Elfrida opened her wardrobe, only to realize with dismay that nearly every outfit she owned had already been worn within the past few days. Inwardly, she admitted the truth. She had sold off most of her old, ragged clothes when she moved, leaving her with far too few options. With the day free, she decided it was the perfect chance to go shopping for the first time in a while. In the corridor, she approached the butler to request a trip into town. While he readily agreed and offered attendants to carry her purchases, she politely refused, hoping to enjoy a quiet outing alone. The butler seemed puzzled by her request for privacy, and the household staff watched her with curious eyes, still adjusting to the sight of the woman once called a symbol of misfortune, now living under this roof. Even the maids, startled by her presence, quickly scattered when she looked their way. Later in town, Elfrida left a clothing shop in high spirits, having arranged for her purchases to be delivered. Cute clothes had always lifted her mood, and she found herself daydreaming about designing some herself one day. But her light-hearted thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a commotion nearby. Down the street, she spotted a man viciously beating another, kicking him even as blood spilled from his mouth, before angrily warning him never to show his face again. Shocked, she was about to intervene when a passerby stopped her, cautioning her that such violence happened daily in this part of town, and warning that it was dangerous, especially for a woman. By the time she looked back, the injured man was gone. On the ground, however, lay a worn, bunny-patterned handkerchief. Recognizing it as something precious to the victim, she resolved to return it. And more importantly, to check on his injuries. Despite the risks, she refused to abandon someone in need. Elsewhere, the injured man, Philon, reassured two children who hovered over him with concern, brushing their hair to comfort them. His father, alarmed by Philon's condition, but Philon dismissed it as only a scratch. When a knock sounded at the door, the children guessed it might be a guest. Philon sent them into the back room before cautiously answering. On the other side stood Elfrida, introducing herself with a password, a playful phrase, a passing wild bunny. The moment Philon saw her face, his expression shifted from wariness to shock. She, on the other hand, looked relieved, declaring that she had finally found him after searching everywhere and speaking his name, Philon. Philon regarded Elfrida with suspicion, questioning why she would seek him out when she was already married to the first prince. He knew of her grand wedding and her background, and hinted at his own knowledge of her family and hometown. Elfride, surprised, admitted she hadn't known he was aware of her circumstances. Philon revealed himself to be an informant, well-versed in the affairs of the country, including the unpopularity surrounding her name. She felt relieved that he didn't know the full truth of her marriage. Shifting the topic, she expressed concern for the injury he had sustained earlier and returned a worn bunny handkerchief she had found in the street. Philon's reaction betrayed how important it was to him. Their exchange was interrupted by Philon's younger siblings, who mentioned their father was unwell. Concern deepened in Elfrida, prompting her to offer help, though she insisted on hearing his story before providing any financial aid. Philon, curious about her persistence, agreed and brought her behind the house. There, he shared the reality of life in the slums, a childhood marked by the loss of his mother, an overworked father, and the struggle to survive. Becoming an informant had not been his plan, but his sharp memory and survival instincts had made it his path. Yet, despite his abilities, he was dismissed because of his age and beaten for speaking the truth about unpaid wages. The nobles in charge ignored them, breeding resentment in the lower town. Elfrida reflected on his determination and resilience despite his environment. Then she made a bold proposal, a formal contract for him to work as her loyal butler, with fair pay for his information-gathering skills. She saw him not as a child from the slums, but as an unpolished gem whose talents were being wasted. Philon was taken aback, questioning why she would choose him. She cited his years of experience, his rare abilities, and his reliability, qualities more dependable than most adults. To her, this partnership would be mutually beneficial. It was the first time Philon felt truly seen by a noble, not as someone to be pitied or ignored, but as an individual with value. Amused by her unusual nature, he remarked on how unlike a noble she seemed. Her smile in response cemented his decision. He invited her inside to draft the contract she spoke of so confidently, and she readily agreed. Philon returned home with Elfrida at his side, assuring his younger siblings that the guest was not someone to fear. Hesitant at first, the children peeked out, and when Elfride kindly introduced herself and asked for their names, they shyly gave them Fran and Dain. Philon quietly observed how she never minded dirt on her clothes and treated them as equals, wondering if she was truly a noble at all. Inside, he confirmed the terms of their agreement and prepared to sign the freshly drafted contract. He was impressed by how quickly Elfrida had prepared the document and asked where she had learned such a skill. She explained that she had grown up seeing such contracts often, but cut herself short when the sound of heavy coughing drew her attention. Philon's father appeared, apologizing for interrupting. Elfrida rose at once, offering a respectful greeting and explaining her purpose. She wished to employ Philon formally as her butler. The man was startled but overwhelmed with gratitude, attempting to fetch tea despite his condition. Philon hurried to restrain him, urging him to rest. Weakly, the father confessed feelings of failure, that his illness had forced his son into hardship despite his talent. Philon reassured him, insisting he had never considered life difficult. Moved, the father thanked Elfrida for recognizing his son's worth, entrusting Philon into her care with heartfelt sincerity. She accepted the responsibility without hesitation. The children tugged at their brother as he prepared to leave, asking if he would return soon and whether Elfrida herself would visit again. She promised she would, brightening their spirits. Philon chided them for growing too attached so quickly, but Elfrida only smiled, admitting she found them adorable. As she departed, her heart lingered on the warmth of the family, even as she worried over the harshness of their lives. Later, at the residence she shared with Lionel, she announced Philon's new role. Lionel listened, but demanded an explanation. Elfrida recounted the incident in the streets and her decision to hire the boy. Though Lionel understood, he expressed doubt. If she had taken him in purely from pity, it would mean little, and surely she could not help every child of the slums. Elfrida assured him that was not her reason. Philon had talent that could become an asset. When pressed, she asked Lionel to recall the busiest day of his recent work. Before he could answer, Philon himself listed every detail of that day with remarkable accuracy, even private matters from nightly meetings. Lionel was stunned, demanding to know how he had such knowledge. But Philon only smiled and kept his secret. Elfrida then made her point clear. The boy possessed rare intelligence and memory, a gift too valuable to waste. She believed ability should be recognized regardless of birth. Lionel, thoughtful, admitted she was right. He agreed to her arrangement, though with caution, warning that he would be keeping watch. Philon accepted gratefully, though Elfrida insisted that he begin training in manners and etiquette at once. The boy groaned in protest, but she refused to treat him like a child. Watching her, Lionel could only sigh at how much of a handful she was. That night, as the two rested, Elfrida's mind lingered on the slums. She asked Lionel about their history, learning they had existed since the kingdom's founding, beginning with foreign settlers. Lionel revealed he had visited them often, even helping prepare meals with the knights. Yet he admitted such charity was only temporary true. Change required restructuring the kingdom itself. One day, he vowed, as king, he would accomplish it. His conviction shone so strongly that Elfrida found herself unexpectedly moved, even admiring him anew. When she spoke her thoughts aloud, Lionel teased her lightly, leaving her flustered and unsure of herself. The next morning, Philon arrived at their home. Elfrida greeted him warmly, while Lionel reminded him to use polite speech. Inside, Elfrida declared that he must become worthy of serving the Claude family as a butler. Philon looked puzzled, but his confusion turned to shock when a group of the household's finest butlers appeared at her summons. They quickly seized him, determined to begin training. As they dragged him away, Elfrida only waved cheerfully, promising he would be in good hands. By evening, the results were already visible. A butler presented Philon before them, his hair neatly styled, his posture corrected, his attire immaculate. Both Elfrida and Lionel were surprised. The butlers praised his quick learning, calling his talent extraordinary. Though Philon shyly worried about his freckles and appearance, Elfrida assured him that his uniqueness was part of his charm. Lionel, however, teased that he looked like a country horse dressed in finery, provoking laughter all around. Even so, in the shadows, an unseen force stirred, watching quietly from the darkness. Elfrida stood before the mirror, carefully fixing her hair. Then she remembered the necklace Lionel had once given to her. But when she opened her jewelry box, her expression stiffened. The necklace was gone. Panic struck her until memory returned. She had placed it in the desk at her parents' house, too distracted with the move to bring it along. With a heavy sigh, she resolved to go back for it, muttering that she had no choice but to retrieve it herself. Arriving at her family's estate, nostalgia washed over her the moment she stepped through the gates. Though not much time had passed since she had left, being there again tugged strangely at her chest. The door creaked open, and a maid's startled face greeted her. Elfrida calmly explained she had only come to collect something she had left behind. Before the maid could respond, her parents rushed forward in a flurry, practically shoving the servant aside in their eagerness. Her father's voice rang out with delight, claiming they had been longing to see her. Her mother's voice followed, warm and eager, insisting the same. Elfrida froze, her heart twisting with confusion. These were not the same parents who once dismissed her so easily. They ushered her into the dining room, coaxing her to eat, chiding her for not informing them of her visit, and asking if she might stay the night. Elfrida tried to steady her breath as unease clawed at her chest. She reminded them that she had only come for something she had left behind. But her father smiled knowingly and asked about her relationship with Lionel. When she admitted her life with him was happy, her father sighed with relief, only to reveal the true reason for their sudden affection. He asked her to persuade Lionel to fund his new business venture. Shock struck her like a blade. Her mother quickly added details, explaining that while her father's original business had been flourishing since her marriage, the profits had been poured into a new enterprise that was failing. Surely, they reasoned, it wouldn't be too difficult for Elfrida to convince Lionel to help. Rage rose inside her. Her hands trembled as she demanded to know what they truly saw her as. A beloved daughter, they replied, without hesitation. But the words only ignited her fury further. She reminded them of their silence when Monica tormented her, of their indifference when the world looked down on her. Now, only because she bore the title of the first prince's wife, they dared to seek her out. She shouted that she was not their tool. Her father's voice darkened with anger, accusing her of insolence, of dishonoring the man who had raised her. Then, in his fury, he hurled a glass in her direction. The shattering echo filled the room as shards cut into her hand, staining her skin with blood. Her mother rushed to stop him, not out of concern for her, but out of fear that word of this might reach Lionel. Clutching her bleeding hand, Elfrida glared at them, her voice laced with contempt. Even when wounded before their eyes, all they cared about was themselves. They were despicable. Her mother tried desperately to excuse the behavior, begging her not to let Lionel hear of it. Elfrida's reply was sharp and resolute. She declared that she was no longer Elfrida Ostermann, but Elfrida Claude. Her parents froze, stunned into silence. Without hesitation, she turned her back on them, claiming what she came for, and walked away. Her father shouted after her to wait, but she paused only long enough to give them one final farewell before leaving them speechless in the wake of her resolve. Later, in the quiet comfort of Lionel's home, Elfrida sat with him over tea. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her spirit, the encounter with her parents leaving scars deeper than the wound on her hand. Yet as she looked at Lionel's face, calmness returned little by little. Lionel mentioned hearing about her visit to her parents' house. Her reply was short, almost reluctant, but his eyes quickly noticed her injured hand. His voice sharpened with concern, insisting this was no small wound. He moved immediately to summon a healer, despite her dismissive protest. To him, she was his wife, and that alone was reason enough to care for her properly. At those words, Elfrida's tension suddenly broke, laughter spilling from her lips, surprising them both. Lionel frowned, flustered at her reaction, scolding her for laughing at his sincerity. Yet in that moment, for the first time that day, her heart felt light again. The next day, Philon reported to the head butler that he had finished assigning the month's cleaning duties. The butler checked the papers, approved them, and told Philon he could go home for the day. He noted how impressive it was that Philon commuted from his family's home instead of staying in the butler's quarters, but Philon answered that spending time with family was what mattered most. With that, he took his leave. Walking through the streets of the slum, Philon thought about payday tomorrow and buying sweets for his little brothers. Then he overheard Elfrida's name spoken in a hushed conversation. A woman handed a box to a man, and he laughed about how maids serving nobles paid well. Philon's suspicion grew. Why would a maid be handing money in a place like this while mentioning Elfrida? It felt shady, and though he was no longer an informant, he decided he should look into it. The next morning at the knight's training grounds, Lionel sparred with a knight. With one swift move, he knocked the sword from his opponent's hand and sent him falling to the ground. Lionel corrected the knight's stance, and the man thanked him for his guidance. Other knights, watching from a distance, whispered about his strength, recalling how he had silenced doubters who once called him a pampered rich boy. They said Lady Anne must be pleased that her son was chosen. Lionel reminded them that in the training yard, he was not the first prince, only another knight. He ordered them to prepare for their turn after the break. Then one of the knights suddenly asked about his married life. Caught off guard, Lionel described Elfrida as rare among noblewomen, strong, unconventional, and interesting. A smile crossed his face, shocking the knights, who whispered to each other that they had just seen him smile, only for his expression to return quickly to its usual composure. Then Philon appeared, running and out of breath. Lionel asked what had happened. Struggling to catch his breath, Philon reported that someone was plotting to murder Lady Elfrida. The words left Lionel shocked. Meanwhile, in the Tark residence, Misha sat in her room drinking tea, her mind replaying the scenes of Lionel and Elfrida at the party and at their wedding. Anger and frustration welled up. When a maid entered with a tray, Misha smashed her teacup to the floor and ordered her out. The maid, shaken, cleaned quickly and left. Alone again, Misha clenched onto her thoughts. She had to win Lionel back. To her, Elfrida's red hair was hideous, unworthy of him. With a twisted laugh, she vowed that she would be the one to save him from that curse. The following day, within the quiet halls of their residence while they're having a tea time, Lionel sat deep in thought. Philon's warning echoed endlessly in his mind. No matter how much he had investigated, the boy could not uncover their true identity. And in such cases, it usually meant the hand of wealthy, high-ranking nobles. Nobles so powerful that even the royal family would not dare cross them. Lionel's expression hardened as he thought to himself, why are they after her? Was this simply the prejudice against her red hair? Or maybe... His thoughts stopped abruptly when Elfrida's gentle voice called to him. She softly said his name, and Lionel looked up, answering that he had only been lost in thought. She asked if things had changed since their marriage. He admitted they had. He no longer attended parties or surrounded himself with women. Because of this, he now found himself able to talk to people he otherwise could not have. Elfrida smiled faintly and noted that it was good for him. Then, glancing at the clock, she mentioned it was nearly lunchtime. When she rose from her seat, Lionel stopped her. He asked if they could talk a little after the meal. She agreed, though unease lingered in her mind. His face looked terribly grim, as though weighed by something heavy. At the dining room table, Elfrida's eyes widened. The dishes before her were beautifully arranged, and she expressed her delight with childlike excitement. She thanked the maid, who smiled and returned her gratitude. Lionel urged her to eat quickly, and she happily obeyed. She cut into the meat and took a bite, savoring it in blissful thought. So delicious! I almost feel bad that I can eat like this every day, like in a luxury hotel. Her happiness radiated through her voice, but on the side, one of the maid lowered her head with a dark smile twisting across her lips. Lionel spoke again, this time about Philon. He said that next time, he would assign the boy some work. But his words cut short when he heard Elfrida cough. At first, he turned to her casually, but then his eyes widened in horror. She coughed again, this time with blood staining her lips. Elfrida froze in shock, her body trembling before her strength gave out, and she collapsed. Lionel shouted her name in panic. He rushed to her side, pulling her into his arms as he called out desperately for help. His voice thundered through the dining hall, commanding someone to bring a doctor, and the head chef immediately. A butler snapped to attention, answered quickly, and rushed out of the room. But Lionel's mind seethed with fury. Damn it! They got her! This is exactly what Philon warned me about. To think I couldn't even detect something as basic as poisoning. With his heart pounding, Lionel carried Elfrida in his arms. As her vision faded, she looked up one last time, barely seeing his desperate face calling her name, before slipping into unconsciousness. Lionel carried Elfrida swiftly to her room, laying her carefully on the bed. The atmosphere inside the chamber was tense and heavy, the air filled with worry as Lionel remained beside her, watching closely for any sign of change. Suddenly, the door burst open with urgency. Phelon rushed inside, calling out Elfrida's name in alarm, his voice filled with worry as he hurried toward her bedside. Lionel acknowledged his arrival calmly and stood up from where he had been watching over her. Elfrida weakly recognized Phelon's presence and murmured his name, prompting Phelon to step closer in distress as he demanded to know what had happened to her. Lionel answered directly, revealing that someone had poisoned her food. He added that she had fortunately survived the attempt. Phelon reacted in shock, momentarily forgetting proper formality. Lionel immediately pointed out that Phelon had forgotten the honorifics expected in his presence. Elfrida apologized softly, explaining that Phelon had not been meant to come here. Phelon quickly reassured her not to worry about it, speaking with urgency and concern. Elfrida gave a faint laugh in response and thanked him. Moments later, however, her eyes slowly closed. Phelon panicked when he noticed her losing consciousness, fearing something was wrong with her again. Lionel calmly explained that she had simply grown exhausted and had fallen asleep. Yet inside Phelon's mind, unease churned heavily. He could not understand why someone like her had to endure something like this, and anger rose within him as he wondered who could possibly be responsible. Gathering himself, Phelon turned to Lionel and asked what they would do next. But as he looked up, he froze in shock at the expression on Lionel's face. Lionel stood there with his fist clenched tightly, his entire demeanor filled with cold fury. His voice carried a clear and determined resolve as he declared that they would uncover whoever was responsible for this. Phelon quietly acknowledged the determination, though deep in his thoughts, he realized he had never seen Lionel so angry before. Lionel continued with certainty, stating that the culprit must be connected to the suspicious individual Phelon had previously mentioned. He made it clear that they would absolutely uncover the mastermind behind the attack. Then Lionel turned to Phelon and gave him a direct order. He wanted Phelon to find out who had poisoned Elfrida. Phelon answered without hesitation, confidently declaring that Lionel should not underestimate a former informant. His response carried both determination and pride, signaling that he was fully prepared to take on the task. At night, Phelon began investigating the poisoning. He went to the kitchen where several maids were talking among themselves. One of them asked if the others had heard the news. Phelon acknowledged that he had. Lady Elfrida's food had been poisoned. The maid reacted with shock, saying it was terrible and wondering who in the world could have done such a thing. Phelon then mentioned hearing that the head chef had been taken away and asked if that was really what had happened. The maid reacted in disbelief, questioning how the kind head chef could possibly be involved. Phelon explained that the chef had likely only been taken away so they could find out what had happened. The maid responded that she hoped that was true. Outside the kitchen door, a servant had been quietly listening to the conversation. After hearing enough, the servant turned around and left. She went to the back door and headed outside. Reaching the backyard, she picked up a shovel and began digging in front of a tree. After digging for a moment, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a brown bottle. At that moment, Phelon suddenly appeared and announced that he had finally found her. The servant quickly turned around and saw him standing there. Trying to remain calm, she hid the bottle behind her back and forced a casual explanation, pretending it was just a coincidence and questioning why he would be in the backyard. Phelon stared at her seriously and began explaining what he had learned. From the cooks and the other servants, he had heard that before the master's food was served, a poison test was always performed. According to them, there had been no problems at that stage. He then pointed out what that meant. If the food had been safe during the poison test,
then the only person who could have poisoned Elfrida's meal afterward was the one responsible for serving the food that day. And that person was the servant standing before him. Philon continued, pointing out that she was now trying to open a medicine bottle. He demanded that she tell the entire story and explain exactly what she had done. Inside Lionel's study room, the atmosphere was quiet as he sat at his desk reading through several files. The silence was broken when someone knocked on the door. Lionel allowed the person to enter, and when the door opened, Philon stepped inside. Philon informed him that he believed he had found someone suspicious connected to the poisoning incident. Lionel immediately reacted with surprise, asking if that was true. Philon confirmed it and explained that the woman had already been secured in the basement. He then asked Lionel to come with him. Together, Lionel and Philon went to the basement where the servant was being held. Once inside, Philon identified the woman as a maid who had only recently begun working at the residence. The maid immediately shouted in anger, demanding that they stop fooling around and release her. Lionel turned to Philon and asked whether he had any proof that the woman was responsible for what had happened. In response, Philon presented the brown bottle he had taken earlier and handed it over. Lionel looked at the bottle with confusion, questioning what it was. Philon then explained that it was a drug that had recently become popular in the slums. In small amounts, it could act as medicine, but in larger doses, it could cause severe reactions such as vomiting and blood poisoning. Lionel realized that those effects matched the symptoms Elfrida had suffered. Philon further explained that he had personally witnessed the maid attempting to dispose of the bottle. Lionel then turned his attention to the maid and questioned whether the act had been done of her own will. The maid answered smugly that she would not respond to that question. At that moment, Lionel slowly drew his sword. His expression turned cold as he explained that this refusal would only make things worse for her. With a piercing stare, he made it clear that she would not leave that room until she revealed everything, without hiding even the smallest detail. The maid fell silent, stunned and visibly frightened. Lionel calmly reminded her that there was still time before dawn. Then he raised the sword and pressed its blade against the maid's neck, demanding that she carefully tell the entire story. Terrified, the maid finally broke down and confessed that she had been ordered by someone to poison Elfrida. Philon immediately demanded to know who was behind the entire scheme. The maid stood there trembling, her face pale with fear, yet she refused to answer. Seeing her silence, Philon lost his composure and shouted at her, accusing her of staying quiet despite the fact that someone had nearly died because of her actions. His anger rose as he questioned whether she even understood the seriousness of what she had done. But the maid remained silent. Her fear only deepened, and desperation spread across her expression. Then, without warning, she suddenly bit down on something hidden inside her mouth. Lionel noticed the movement at once and tried to stop her, but it was already too late. Blood began dripping visibly from the maid's mouth, and within moments her body collapsed to the floor. Philon froze in shock at the sudden turn of events, unable to process what had just happened. Lionel quickly crouched beside the maid and checked her condition. After a brief moment, he confirmed that she was already dead. It appeared that she had been carrying poison inside her mouth all along. Philon remained stunned, still trying to comprehend the scene that had unfolded in front of him. Lionel looked at him and calmly asked if he was all right. Philon hesitated as he tried to respond, clearly shaken and struggling to gather his thoughts. Lionel told him to calm down, firmly stating that the blame did not lie with him. According to Lionel, the real culprit was the mastermind who had pushed the maid to such an extreme act. Philon quietly acknowledged the words, though he still looked shaken. After a moment, he apologized, admitting that he had been distracted by what had just happened. Lionel understood his reaction, pointing out that it was only natural after witnessing a woman take her own life right in front of him. For the moment, Lionel instructed Philon to call the head butler so they could have the room cleaned up. Philon nodded and accepted the order. The following day, inside Elfrida's room, the atmosphere was calm but heavy with the weight of the previous night's events. Elfrida listened quietly as the situation was explained to her, eventually understanding the full story of what had happened after she lost consciousness. Lionel admitted that the investigation had reached a dead end. The maid responsible had died before revealing the identity of the person who ordered the poisoning, and with that, the only lead they had was gone. Elfrida responded without blaming him, expressing that the fault did not lie with him, but with the true mastermind behind the attack. However, as she sat there, deep thoughts began to swirl in her mind. She had believed that marrying Lionel would allow her to avoid the tragic fate that once awaited her. Yet the poisoning attempt made her question everything. A troubling thought formed within her. Perhaps the path leading to her death could not be avoided after all, no matter what choices she made. Lionel noticed the distant look in her eyes and realized she had fallen deep into thought. He gently called her name to bring her attention back. Then he stepped forward, knelt in front of her, and carefully took her hand in his. Elfrida was visibly startled by the sudden gesture. Lionel lowered his head and pressed a kiss against her hand, making a solemn promise in the name of the Claude family that he would uncover the mastermind behind the attack. He assured her that she should not worry. The unexpected sincerity of the moment left Elfrida speechless. A strange feeling rose within her, something difficult to name. It felt like familiarity or perhaps respect, or something else entirely that she could not yet understand. After a moment, she thanked him and admitted that she was happy he felt that way. Then she gently pulled her hand away from his. In her mind, she reminded herself of the reality of their relationship. Their marriage was only a contract. There was no love between them. It was nothing more than a relationship built on mutual interests. Day passed. Inside Elfrida's room, Philon stood nearby as he carefully observed her condition. After watching her closely, he concluded that her complexion had improved greatly and that it seemed safe to say she had fully recovered. The doctor had already given permission for her to go outside again. Elfrida reacted with visible relief upon hearing this news, grateful that she was finally well enough to leave her room. Philon, however, quickly added a warning that she must not overexert herself. Elfrida responded obediently, assuring him that she understood. Philon remained unconvinced by her response and remarked that there was no way she truly understood what he meant. With his duties finished, he announced that he would be leaving. Elfrida thanked him, and Philon exited the room, closing the door behind him. Left alone, Elfrida stretched her arms with a small sense of freedom, pleased that she could finally go outside again. She thought about doing something immediately, but paused before acting. Reaching for a mirror, she examined her reflection closely. As she looked at her face, she noticed how dry her skin had become. In her thoughts, she complained about how rough it looked, realizing that lying in bed for so long had taken a toll on her appearance. Although she understood that the long rest had been necessary, she still sighed in frustration at the condition of her skin. She wished she had some lotion to use. Then another thought crossed her mind. Since she had some free time now, she began considering the possibility of making one herself. Outside the mansion, Elfrida stepped into the garden with renewed energy. Determined to begin right away, she started searching through the plants and grass around her. After a moment of looking, she suddenly reacted with satisfaction, realizing she had found exactly what she had been searching for. She began pulling a particular plant from the ground, recalling that she had seen it before during one of her earlier walks. In her thoughts, she recognized it as a wildflower that could be used to make lotion. Since the story she knew had originally been written by a human, she believed it made sense that such a plant could exist and be used for that purpose. Encouraged by the discovery, Elfrida happily decided to gather as much of it as she could. With enthusiasm, she continued pulling the plants from the ground, clearly enjoying herself as she worked. Not far away, Lionel happened to be walking nearby when he noticed her. His attention was drawn to the unusual sight in the garden, and he paused as he watched from a distance. Observing her actions carefully, Lionel could not help but wonder what exactly Elfride was doing. Meanwhile, unaware that she was being watched, Elfrida continued gathering the plants with cheerful determination, happily grabbing everything she could find while fully absorbed in what she was doing. After finishing her bath, Elfrida returned to their room feeling refreshed. The warmth of the hot bath after a long day left her in high spirits, and she thought to herself that there was nothing better than relaxing in hot water after working. As she stepped further inside, she suddenly noticed Lionel sitting on the sofa. Surprised to see him already there, she realized he had returned. Lionel calmly acknowledged that he had just arrived and then stood up, saying that he wanted to ask her something. Elfrida looked puzzled and asked what it was about. Lionel immediately brought up what he had seen earlier that day in the backyard, questioning what exactly she had been doing there. Elfrida explained that she had been gathering materials to make lotion. Lionel repeated the word in confusion, clearly surprised by the answer. With cheerful enthusiasm, Elfrida explained that she had finally been given permission to go outside again, so she decided to spend the time doing something she had been wanting to do. However, Lionel pointed out another detail at the same time, the fact that she had also been told not to overexert herself. Elfrida faltered slightly at that reminder. Lionel sighed and continued, explaining that she was still recovering. He pointed out how dangerous it could be for her to work alone in the backyard while she was not fully well. If she pushed herself too hard and collapsed, it might take time for anyone to find her. He made it clear that such a situation would not be good for her at all. Elfrida fell silent for a moment, realizing the truth in his words. She admitted that he was right and apologized, acknowledging that her actions had been careless. In her thoughts, she reflected that Lionel truly had a point this time. If she had collapsed alone outside, it would have caused serious trouble. Inside the room, Elfrida quietly reflected in her mind. Lionel still seemed distant and not very sociable, and she felt certain that he would probably worry about her again. Her thoughts were interrupted when Lionel spoke. Observing her behavior, he remarked that she never seemed to change and commented that he had always believed noblewomen were supposed to behave with grace. Elfrida responded calmly, acknowledging that there were certainly many women like that. From an early age, noblewomen were taught to behave in a refined and elegant way. However, she admitted that living like that felt suffocating to her. She explained that living only according to what others expected was frightening, because it felt as if she might eventually lose herself and fade away while trying to satisfy those expectations. As she said this, she pointed out that Lionel himself must have experienced something similar in the past. At her words, Lionel fell silent. A memory surfaced in his mind, someone firmly reminding him that a prince must always be strong and wise. Even simple interests such as drawing had once been dismissed as unsuitable for him, something considered only a girl's pastime. Instead, he had been ordered to put such things aside and focus on practicing swordsmanship. The memory faded, and Elfrida continued speaking. She admitted that the situation earlier had been her fault. She promised that in public, she would fulfill her role properly as his wife. Still, she confessed that constantly acting like a perfect lady was difficult for her. Lionel listened quietly and eventually admitted that she was right. He realized that although he himself had once been forced to become someone he was expected to be, he had unknowingly imposed those same expectations on her. For that, he apologized. Elfrida gently thanked him for listening to her. She added that it was the least she could do after causing him worry earlier. She sincerely expressed her gratitude to him and admitted that she was truly happy. At that moment, Lionel suddenly froze while looking at her. Elfrida noticed the change immediately and asked if he was all right, pointing out that his face had turned unusually red. Caught off guard and visibly flustered, Lionel quickly insisted that it was nothing. Yet even as he tried to dismiss it, he could not hide the shy reaction that lingered in his expression. The following day at the barracks, Lionel sat at his desk working through his duties. Papers were spread out in front of him as he held a pen in his hand, yet something about him seemed off. Not far away, the other knights quietly observed him. They noticed that his mood seemed unusual, and whispers began circulating among them. One remarked that Lionel looked strange that day. Another agreed, pointing out that it did not simply look like he was in a bad mood. Something else seemed to be troubling him. Meanwhile, Lionel let out a long sigh as he stared down at the pen in his hand. His thoughts drifted back to the previous day. Elfrida's words kept replaying in his mind. The moment she thanked him for listening, saying that it was the least she could do after making him worry, and the way she expressed how happy she felt. Her smiling face appeared again in his memory. No matter how much he tried to focus on his work, he found himself repeatedly thinking about what had happened the day before and about the strange feeling lingering in his chest. While he remained lost in thought, someone suddenly spoke to him. One of the knights approached and asked if he was all right, wondering if he might not be in good condition. Lionel responded that nothing was wrong. However, the knight pointed out that Lionel had been repeating the same task for quite a while without realizing it. Lionel fell silent at the observation. The knight continued, explaining that the others were beginning to feel uneasy because Lionel seemed to be in such a bad mood. He advised Lionel to look around and realize how he appeared to everyone else. Lionel insisted again that he was fine and told them not to worry about him. But the knight refused to let it go. Raising his voice, he finally ordered Lionel to stop being stubborn and go home for the day, directly calling him out as the stubborn prince. Back at the mansion, Phelon was busy carrying out his household duties. While cleaning one of the rooms, he worked quietly until the door suddenly opened. Looking up in surprise, he saw Lionel standing there. Lionel explained that he had been made to leave the barracks early. Phelon accepted the explanation and politely asked whether Lionel would like some tea. Lionel agreed and took a seat on the sofa, then casually invited Phelon to sit and join him as well. Phelon hesitated briefly but eventually accepted the invitation with gratitude. After serving the tea, he sat down across from Lionel. As the two settled into their seats, Lionel began speaking, mentioning that they had not really had the chance to sit down and talk face-to-face like this before. Phelon realized that was true. So much had been happening recently that they had never found the time. Then Phelon admitted that there was something he had been curious about for a while. Lionel asked what it was. Phelon brought up the topic of Elfrida, recalling that Lionel had once exchanged letters with her. Lionel acknowledged that it had indeed happened. As he said this, a memory resurfaced in his mind. Back when Misha had confronted them, Elfrida had confidently claimed that she and Lionel had been exchanging letters ever since they first met at the ball long ago. Remembering that moment, Lionel realized that the story had been established then. Phelon listened carefully before admitting that this particular detail had always puzzled him. At the time, he had not been able to fully understand it, and the uncertainty had frustrated him. Lionel simply responded that he understood. But as Phelon observed Lionel more closely, something began to feel suspicious. With a perceptive look, he pointed out that he was capable of seeing through lies. From his perspective, there had to be something else going on between Lionel and Lady Elfrida. Lionel fell silent after Phelon's suspicion. For a moment, he said nothing, realizing in his thoughts that Phelon's perception was sharper than expected. It seemed clear to him that hiding the truth any longer would be difficult. Still, he reasoned that if there was anyone capable of keeping a secret, it would be someone like Phelon. With that decision made, Lionel finally spoke, warning that what he was about to reveal must remain a secret. Phelon reacted with surprise, but Lionel continued, making the conditions clear. If the promise were broken, Phelon would be dismissed without question. Even with that risk, Lionel asked whether he still wanted to hear the truth. Phelon answered confidently that he did. As a former informant, he felt that he could not possibly ignore something like this. Lionel then revealed the truth. Between him and Elfrida, there was no love. Their marriage was not built on affection at all. Instead, it was nothing more than a contract marriage. The words shocked Phelon so much that he almost exclaimed aloud, but Lionel quickly stopped him by covering his mouth and ordering him to stay quiet. Once Phelon calmed down, he asked if Lionel was truly serious about what he had just said. Lionel confirmed that he was. Philon admitted that the situation was far more unexpected than he had imagined. He wondered whether such an arrangement affected their daily life in any way. Lionel explained that it had not created any problems so far, since neither of them had strong feelings for the other. Yet he also admitted something else. Recently, Elfrida had been on his mind quite often. Philon reacted with curiosity, prompting Lionel to explain that it was probably because of her unusual personality. He felt as though he was constantly wondering what she might do next. Philon remained silent while listening, though inside his thoughts he could not help but question Lionel's reasoning. No matter how he considered it, the explanation did not quite seem convincing. Still, he decided that it was not his place to interfere. A small smile formed on his face as he concluded that he would keep the secret to himself. In fact, he quietly thought that it might be more interesting this way. At Misha's residence, the atmosphere inside the room was tense. A maid knelt on the floor with her head bowed low, too afraid to even raise her face. Misha stood before her, demanding to hear what she had just said. The maid trembled as she delivered the report. The attempt to assassinate Elfrida had failed. The maid who had carried out the poisoning had died, committing suicide before revealing anything further. Misha reacted coldly to the news, dismissing the dead servant as nothing more than a useless maid. However, the trembling servant quickly added that she had managed to gather another piece of information. According to what she had learned, Elfrida had recently taken in a boy from the slums. Hearing this, Misha paused. The mention of a boy from the slums immediately caught her attention. A slow, sinister smile spread across her face as she considered the information, clearly finding the detail far more interesting than the failed assassination attempt. At the residence of Lionel and Elfrida, the two were seated in the dining area, quietly eating their meal together. The calm atmosphere was interrupted when someone knocked on the door. Lionel allowed the person to enter, and a servant stepped inside with a respectful bow. The servant announced that a letter had just arrived for Prince Lionel and handed it over. Lionel examined the letter, immediately recognizing something about it. His reaction caused Elfrida to grow curious, and she asked who the letter was from. Lionel hesitated for a brief moment before revealing that it had come from his father. The answer startled Elfrida so much that she immediately stood up in shock at the mention of her father-in-law. Lionel then politely asked the servant to wait outside for a moment, and the servant obeyed the request and left the room. Once they were alone, Elfrida asked if she could take a look at the letter as well. Lionel agreed as they read it. Elfrida realized its meaning, and Lionel said that the letter was a summons sent directly from his father. At the imperial castle, the king sat upon the throne as Lionel and Elfrida entered the throne room. The two approached respectfully and bowed before him, showing proper reverence. Lionel formally announced his presence and declared himself at the king's service. The king acknowledged them calmly and welcomed both of them. Lionel then brought up the letter he had received, mentioning that the king had written that he wished to ask something. The king confirmed this and revealed that the matter concerned their butler. Hearing this, both Lionel and Elfride were momentarily surprised, silently realizing that the discussion had shifted to their household staff. Lionel responded by explaining that the management of the butlers fell under their responsibility and asked whether any inconvenience had occurred. The king then asked directly whether there was someone among their butlers who had been born in the slums. The sudden question caused both Lionel and Elfride to fall silent for a moment. In Elfrida's mind, it became immediately clear that the king was referring to Philon. She realized that the information had spread quickly. Elfrida stepped forward and confirmed that the king was correct. She explained that she herself had been the one who had employed him. The king then asked for her reason. Elfrida explained that Philon possessed an excellent memory, along with exceptional observational abilities. She believed those qualities made him well suited for the work of a butler. She also added that he had already become a respected figure among the other butlers and that he contributed greatly to supporting their daily lives. The king listened before responding that he understood her reasoning. However, he stated that he could not agree with her decision. Hearing this, Elfrida could not help but think to herself that the king's words sounded exactly like the arguments Lionel had once made. The thought crossed her mind that the two truly resembled each other as father and son. Lionel then spoke in Elfrida's defense, asking the king to consider her reasoning more carefully. He pointed out that even his own knight order included some commoners. The king responded by explaining that their nation placed great importance on military strength. Because of that, talented individuals from various backgrounds were occasionally permitted to join the knights as a special exception. However, he emphasized that this exception applied only to the knights and nowhere else. Allowing such exceptions in other areas would risk damaging the dignity of the royal family. As Elfrida listened, frustration stirred in her mind. She thought about the irony of the situation. The king had approved Lionel's marriage to someone like her, a woman with red hair who was often looked down upon. Yet now he was interfering with the employment of a single butler. To her, the reasoning felt completely unreasonable. She also could not ignore another troubling thought. The slums were a problem that existed within the king's own country, yet instead of addressing that issue, he was dismissing someone from that background as unsuitable for their status. The situation felt strange to her, almost as if some powerful influence was pushing the matter from behind the scenes. With that thought in mind, Elfrida respectfully asked the king where he had heard about this matter. The king answered plainly that he had heard it directly from the lady of House Tark. The revelation struck both Lionel and Elfrida with visible shock. For a brief moment, the throne room fell into silence as the meaning behind the king's words settled in. In Lionel's mind, a sudden realization surfaced. He remembered something Philon had once warned him about, that when incidents like this occurred, they were often the work of wealthy and powerful nobles. Philon had even cautioned him to be careful, explaining that the person behind such schemes might be someone so influential that even the royal family would hesitate to oppose them. As Lionel reflected on those words, the pieces began to fall into place. Everything suddenly made sense. The situation before them was not a simple complaint. It was a trap carefully set by Misha in order to discredit Elfrida. That realization led him to another conclusion. The recent events surrounding them had likely been orchestrated by the very same mastermind. The thought caused Lionel to clench his teeth in frustration. He glanced at Elfrida beside him and sensed that she had likely reached the same conclusion. However, there was no room to react openly. For the moment, their priority was to escape the situation without worsening it. Lionel then stepped forward and addressed the king. He spoke carefully, asking his father to reconsider the matter of the butler. He assured the king that he would personally strengthen the surveillance over the servant and take responsibility for monitoring him closely. The king considered the request and eventually agreed to put the issue on hold for the time being, acknowledging that the matter had arisen rather suddenly. However, he made his position clear. If the butler caused even the slightest trouble, he would be dismissed immediately. Lionel accepted the condition without hesitation and expressed his understanding, thanking the king respectfully for granting the request. Inside the carriage returning from the imperial castle, Lionel and Elfrida sat facing each other in tense silence. The weight of what had just happened in the throne room lingered between them. Elfrida was the first to break the silence, expressing her certainty that Misha was the one behind everything. Lionel agreed with the suspicion. He reflected on the earlier incident with the maid who had poisoned Elfrida, recalling how the maid had taken her own life without revealing anything. Considering Misha's influence and power, Lionel reasoned that disposing of a servant or two would have been a trivial matter for someone like her. However, despite reaching that conclusion, he still could not understand the reason behind it. From his perspective, someone as powerful as Misha would not need to target Elfrida, nor would she need to pursue a position such as becoming the prince's wife. Listening to his reasoning, Elfrida could not help but think that Lionel was being incredibly dense. She then clarified the situation for him, pointing out that Misha was not aiming for status at all. The real target was Lionel himself. Lionel reacted with clear shock at that conclusion. The idea that someone would go as far as attempting poison simply for that reason left him confused and unable to fully comprehend it. Elfrida fell silent for a moment, her thoughts turning inward. She considered the original course of events she knew about, realizing that a single mistake at this stage could destroy everything. In that original storyline, Misha had been the type who would stop at nothing once she set her sights on something. Elfrida also recognized that Lionel's current status could no longer be used as a weakness against them. With that realization, she understood that the situation had reached a point where she would need to face the danger directly and prepare herself. Gathering her resolve, Elfrida reassured Lionel that everything would be fine. She declared that she would handle the situation herself and find a way to deal with Misha. At the residence of Lionel and Elfrida, the two explained everything that had happened at the Imperial Castle to Philon. As soon as the truth was revealed, Philon reacted with clear shock upon hearing that Misha Tark was suspected to be the mastermind behind the events. Lionel confirmed the suspicion and explained that Misha had somehow obtained information about Philon's background. He further revealed that she had even advised the king to dismiss Philon from his position. Philon fell silent after hearing this. Lionel continued by explaining the reasoning behind it. The Tark family was known for their belief in bloodline supremacy, so someone like Philon, who was not a noble and had come from the slums, would naturally be considered unfit to serve the Claude family in their eyes. Elfrida added that this realization had allowed her to understand everything clearly. All the recent incidents and troubles they had faced had been orchestrated by Misha from the beginning. Philon remained quiet, lost in thought. In his mind, he reflected on how, even after realizing that Lady Elfrida was in serious danger, he had still failed to prevent the poisoning. Now, with the king's order involved, the situation felt even heavier. Thoughts of his father and his younger siblings surfaced, leaving him unable to respond for a moment. Elfrida then spoke carefully about the situation. She pointed out that the Tark family was the most powerful noble house in the country, and if Misha truly was the mastermind, they would have to proceed with extreme caution. Lionel noticed Philon's silence and then addressed the matter of his dismissal. He explained that the order had been temporarily put on hold, but it came with a condition. Lionel had promised the king that he would strengthen surveillance over Philon. Hearing this, Philon was shocked. The realization that Lionel had gone against the king's wishes left him confused, and he questioned why the prince would go that far for him. Elfrida answered without hesitation, explaining that the reason should already be obvious. Philon was an important butler to them. Her words left Philon stunned and speechless. Elfrida continued passionately, declaring that she absolutely refused to lose such an excellent butler. She even reminded them that there was a contract involved, making the demand for his dismissal completely unreasonable. Lionel responded with mild resignation, noting that he had already heard that argument many times before. Elfrida insisted that it should not matter how many times she said it, while Lionel replied that he wished she would at least consider his position, having to hear the same argument repeatedly. The exchange caused Philon to finally break his silence, and he began to laugh. After the brief moment of lightness, Elfrida returned to the matter at hand. Now that they had confirmed Misha as the mastermind, she stated that they needed to act immediately. Lionel agreed and began to consider their next move. Elfrida then confidently declared what their first step should be. Their specialty, she reminded them, was gathering information, and that was exactly what they needed to do next. Determined to uncover the truth, Elfrida began taking careful and deliberate steps. In order to connect with nobles and gather useful information, she actively attended various balls and social gatherings. At the same time, Philon carried out his own investigation. Under Elfrida's instructions, he quietly looked into places and people that might be connected to Misha. Every move they made was done cautiously so as not to arouse suspicion, all with the goal of eventually exposing Misha's wrongdoing to the public. One night, the three of them gathered again to discuss their progress. Elfrida laid out the next step of their plan, explaining that Lionel needed to send a formal invitation to a ball specifically for Misha. She reasoned that if the invitation was sent under Lionel's name, Misha would almost certainly attend. Lionel accepted the plan without hesitation. Elfrida then presented the information they had gathered so far that day. Philon reviewed it and admitted that although they had collected several pieces of information, none of it was truly conclusive yet. Despite this, Elfrida remained optimistic, encouraging them by saying that they still had some time left and that they should continue doing their best. Philon let out a small sigh but agreed to keep going. While listening to the conversation, Lionel quietly observed Elfrida. In his mind, he realized that she must be under tremendous mental pressure. Anyone would struggle to remain cheerful knowing that their life might be threatened again at any moment. As the discussion came to an end, Elfrida thanked Philon for staying up so late to help them and acknowledged that he must be tired. Philon dismissed the concern and excused himself from the room. Lionel then suggested that it was already late and that they should end their work for the night. However, Elfrida immediately resisted the idea. Still holding the documents in her hands, she insisted that she had not even finished organizing the information they had gathered. Seeing how exhausted she was becoming, Lionel stepped forward and gently held her arms to stop her. He warned her that pushing herself too hard would accomplish nothing if she collapsed from overwork. Hearing this, Elfrida looked at him for a moment before finally agreeing. Soon after, the two retired for the night. However, once they were in bed, Elfrida found herself unable to fall asleep. Her mind continued to race with worries about the situation and what might happen if she failed to act. In the quiet darkness, Lionel suddenly called her name. Elfrida realized he was still awake and asked if he had not fallen asleep either. Lionel replied that he had been about to ask her the same question. Elfrida gave no direct answer, only offering a small smile. After a brief pause, Lionel hesitantly made a suggestion. If she truly could not fall asleep, he proposed that they try holding hands while they slept. The suggestion surprised Elfrida, leaving her staring at him in silence. Lionel then explained the reason behind the idea. When his younger brother Mark was a child, he often felt calmer if he could touch someone while falling asleep. Lionel added that since he was there with her now, she could relax and sleep peacefully. Elfrida was still surprised by his kindness. In her mind, she wondered why he was being so gentle with her and worried that such gestures could easily give her the wrong impression. Nevertheless, she quietly thanked him and accepted the offer. When their hands finally clasped together, Elfrida almost immediately drifted into sleep. Lionel watched her for a moment and smiled softly. At Philon's residence, the young butler sat alone, deeply absorbed in thought as he reflected on everything that had happened. The events of the past days replayed in his mind one after another. For most of his life, Philon had harbored nothing but resentment toward nobles. From his experience, the nobles he had encountered were selfish people who cared only about themselves and their own power. To him, they had always seemed like a collection of corrupt individuals who ignored the suffering of others. Yet the two people he now served were different. Lionel and Elfrida had repeatedly shown concern for others and treated people with respect regardless of their background or status. Even someone like him, a boy who had grown up in the slums, had been accepted and valued by them. As Philon reflected on this, a firm belief began to grow within him. Those two had the potential to change the country itself. However, he also understood the seriousness of the situation they were facing. Misha's influence was powerful, and simply gathering information might not be enough to stand against her authority. With that realization, Philon rose to his feet with renewed determination. In his heart, he decided that for the sake of those two, and for the people suffering under the current system, he needed to find something more he could do. Driven by that resolve, Philon stepped toward the door and marched outside, determined to search for another way to help. At the knight's barracks, Lionel was in the middle of his usual training, practicing with his sword with full focus. The sharp sound cutting through the air echoed through the training grounds as he continued his routine. During a short break, Lionel suddenly noticed something unusual nearby. Sensing that someone was hiding close to the training area, he spoke up and called out, suggesting that if the person needed something, they should simply approach him directly. At that moment, Philon stepped out from behind a tree where he had been hiding. Realizing he had been discovered, he walked toward Lionel and apologized, explaining that he had not wanted to interrupt the prince's training. Lionel dismissed the concern and asked what Philon needed. Philon then revealed the reason he had come. Though he admitted that the request might be impolite, he asked Lionel if he could teach him swordsmanship. The request surprised Lionel. He questioned the sudden change in Philon's intentions, wondering why the butler had suddenly decided to pursue such training. Philon responded with determination, explaining that he wanted to become stronger. With that declaration, he bowed deeply and earnestly asked for Lionel's help. Lionel was briefly taken aback by the seriousness of the request. After a moment, however, he agreed. Deciding to humor Philon's determination, Lionel tossed him a wooden practice sword and told him he would give him a chance to train. At the same time, he warned Philon not to complain during the process. Philon accepted enthusiastically, smiling as he thanked Lionel sincerely. The training began immediately. Lionel first instructed Philon on the most basic stance, telling him to relax his shoulders and adjust his posture properly. Philon followed the instructions carefully. Lionel then pointed out that Philon's arm strength was weak and explained that before anything else, he would need to build his muscles. To begin addressing that problem, Lionel ordered him to start doing push-ups. Philon struggled as he counted each repetition, forcing himself through the exercise until he reached 99 and then 100. His body was already trembling with exhaustion when Lionel calmly informed him that 50 more remained. The announcement left Philon stunned. Overwhelmed by fatigue, he collapsed onto the ground, thinking to himself that he could not continue any longer. Lionel then challenged him, asking if he was already giving up. Hearing that, Philon remembered the determination he had made earlier. Reminding himself of his decision to grow stronger, he pushed past the exhaustion, stood back up, and prepared to continue. At the training grounds of the Knights' Barracks, Lionel and Philon eventually moved from simple drills to a direct sparring match. Each of them held a wooden sword as they faced one another, ready to begin. Philon made the first move, charging forward with determination and swinging his weapon. Lionel immediately blocked the attack with ease. As he defended, he calmly pointed out that the strike had been too slow and that Philon was using far too much effort in each movement. Refusing to give up, Philon quickly prepared another attack. Determined to improve, he tried again with renewed energy. However, Lionel reacted instantly. In a single swift motion, he stepped in and placed the tip of his wooden sword against Philon's neck, stopping the attack before it could even begin. The result was obvious. Philon lowered his sword and collapsed onto one knee, exhausted and frustrated, acknowledging that the match was already over. Seeing this, Lionel spoke honestly, explaining that swordsmanship simply did not suit Philon. Philon accepted the statement without argument and admitted that he understood. Lionel then asked the question that had been on his mind. If Philon already knew that the sword was not his strength, why was he pushing himself this far? Lionel even pointed out that Philon had always hated nobles, and Lionel himself was one of them. Philon answered without hesitation. He admitted that he still hated nobles in general, but Lionel and Elfrida were different. They had paid attention to people like him, the poor and forgotten. Philon confessed that he had never met a noble who treated him with such kindness, and because of that, he wanted to repay them. Lionel remained silent for a moment as he listened. Then he gave Philon advice. Instead of forcing himself down a path that did not suit him, Lionel encouraged him to protect them in the way he was best at. He explained that strength was not the only way to protect people. In many situations, information could be far more powerful than brute force. Philon already possessed that ability, and Lionel reminded him that he had helped them more than enough through his skills. Hearing those words deeply inspired Philon. Filled with renewed determination, he declared that he would do his best to gather even more information for them. Lionel smiled at the response and asked if Philon would continue supporting them from now on. As he said this, he extended his hand forward. Philon eagerly reached out and shook Lionel's hand, happily confirming that he would. Inside Elfrida's study room, she spent her time carefully organizing the documents and investigation records they had gathered so far. Papers were spread across the desk as she worked through each report, reviewing the information one by one and compiling everything in order. While continuing her work, she opened one of the drawers in her desk. Inside, she noticed an unfamiliar envelope that immediately caught her attention. For a moment, she wondered to herself what it could be. Curious, Elfrida took the envelope and opened it. As she began reading the contents of the letter inside, her expression gradually changed. The moment she finished reading, a confident smile appeared on her face. The contents of the letter revealed something extremely important, something that could serve as undeniable proof of Misha's wrongdoing. With that realization, Elfrida recognized that she was now holding indisputable evidence of Misha's evil deeds. Following the plan they had carefully prepared, Lionel sent an official invitation to Misha. The invitation was delivered under his name, ensuring that she would attend. The party had been arranged with a very specific purpose, to draw Misha out and eventually bring her to justice for her misdeeds. When the night of the event arrived, the venue was filled with nobles and distinguished guests. Many of them were surprised by the occasion, quietly discussing the unusual situation among themselves. Some wondered why Prince Lionel was hosting a party, while others mentioned that the event had likely been arranged at Lady Elfrida's request. Meanwhile, Elfrida was finishing her preparations for the evening. Lionel waited patiently nearby with Philon. After some time, Elfrida finally appeared and apologized for keeping Lionel waiting. Lionel calmly assured her that it was not a problem. As Philon looked at Elfrida in her elegant appearance, he could not help but think to himself in amazement that her beauty was truly striking. Lionel then asked if she was ready, and Elfrida confidently replied that she was. With determination, she declared that it was time to face the mastermind behind everything. Together, they entered the party hall. The moment the guests saw them, whispers spread through the crowd. Many admired Lionel's usual handsome appearance, while others were captivated by the elegance of Elfrida's dress. Lionel then stepped forward and addressed the guests. He thanked everyone for accepting the invitation and expressed his gratitude for their presence. He also announced that a splendid meal had been prepared for them and encouraged everyone to enjoy the evening together as fellow citizens of the nation. Just as the atmosphere began to settle, a new voice suddenly echoed through the hall, greeting the gathering. Lionel and Elfrida both turned their attention toward the entrance. In that moment, Elfrida realized that the person they had been waiting for had finally arrived. Misha calmly apologized for her late arrival, explaining that her preparations had taken some time. The guests quickly recognized her and began murmuring again, noting that Lady Misha's presence would surely make the gathering even more elegant. Misha then approached Lionel and greeted him politely, expressing her pleasure at seeing him again. Lionel returned the greeting with equal courtesy before excusing himself and encouraging her to enjoy the party. The guests applauded Lionel as the evening continued. Amid the elegant atmosphere of the hall, Misha wore a subtle yet sinister smile. At the same time, Elfrida also smiled quietly, knowing that the true purpose of the party had only just begun. The party continued smoothly, just as Lionel and Elfrida had planned. Guests mingled, conversations flowed, and the atmosphere remained lively as the two hosts greeted nobles and exchanged polite words with those in attendance. While speaking with several guests, Elfrida quietly scanned the room, keeping a careful watch on the crowd. After a moment, she realized something strange. Misha was nowhere to be seen. The sudden absence made Elfrida wonder where she had gone. Then, without warning, a voice greeted her from behind. When Elfrida turned, she found Misha standing there. Misha politely addressed her, offering a courteous greeting. Lionel immediately sensed something suspicious in the sudden appearance and instinctively became cautious, but Elfrida calmly stopped him from intervening. Maintaining a composed smile, Elfrida returned the greeting and expressed her pleasure at seeing that Misha was doing well. Misha then apologized for what had happened previously, claiming that she had never known about the relationship between Elfrida and Prince Lionel. She remarked that she could never have imagined such a situation, not even in her dreams. Elfrida responded calmly, reassuring her that there was no need to worry and that anyone else would likely have thought the same thing. However, Misha's tone soon shifted. She expressed concern about something she had heard, something troubling regarding Elfrida's household. Elfrida immediately sensed something strange in the way Misha described it, referring to someone in her home in a suspicious manner. Misha then revealed the rumor she claimed to have heard. According to her, Elfrida had secretly brought a boy from the slums into her household without even informing Prince Lionel. The accusation stunned both Lionel and Elfrida. Almost immediately, murmurs spread throughout the crowd of nobles. Shock and gossip rippled across the hall as guests whispered to one another, questioning the situation. Some expressed disbelief that a woman who already had a partner would bring another man into her household, while others were even more scandalized by the claim that the boy came from the slums. As the whispers intensified, Elfrida quickly understood what was happening. In her mind, she recognized Misha's thinking clearly. As someone obsessed with bloodline superiority, Misha believed that Lionel, as a royal, must naturally share the same prejudice. Taking advantage of her influence, Misha was manipulating the situation, knowing that the other nobles would not dare oppose her openly. It was a calculated attempt to publicly humiliate Elfrida. Lionel could also sense that the situation was quickly shifting in Misha's favor. Realizing the danger, he tried to intervene and explain the truth. However, before he could finish speaking, Misha suddenly raised her voice again and delivered another accusation. She claimed that the boy from the slums was not just an ordinary servant, but someone who had once been a habitual thief. The statement shocked the entire hall even more. The guests erupted into louder murmurs, many immediately believing the claim simply because it came from someone as influential as Lady Misha. Some began criticizing the Claude household, saying it was disgraceful for such a person to be allowed into such a respected noble family. Others even directed their hostility toward Elfrida herself, accusing the red-haired lady of bringing trouble exactly as they had expected. The wave of accusations stunned Elfrida for a moment as she listened to the crowd turning against her. Inside her mind, however, she knew the truth. Philon was nothing like the person Misha was describing. The entire story was a fabrication. Misha had launched the attack so suddenly and skillfully that Elfrida had been caught off guard. Still, Elfrida quickly regained her composure. Though Misha believed she had gained the upper hand, Elfrida remained calm, because Misha did not yet realize that Elfrida had already prepared a plan of her own. As the commotion in the hall grew louder, Elfrida stepped forward and addressed the crowd, asking everyone to remain calm. While maintaining her composed expression, she realized that the moment had finally arrived, the moment to reveal the evidence of Misha Tark's wrongdoing. With confidence, she declared that she would explain everything to them. Amid the growing tension, Lionel stood nearby and remembered the conversation he had shared with Elfrida before they entered the grand hall earlier that evening. At that time, Elfrida had asked him for a promise. No matter what Misha said or did during the party, Lionel was not to interfere. When Lionel had questioned the reason, Elfrida explained that Misha's target was her alone, and she wanted to confront the situation with her own hands. Lionel had smiled at her determination and agreed that he would not intervene recklessly. Now, standing in the hall as the situation escalated, Lionel recalled those words. Though he had made that promise, he could not help but think that if Elfrida were truly placed in danger, he might not be able to remain silent. Meanwhile, Misha responded to Elfrida's declaration, asking if that meant Elfrida was willing to admit the accusations being spread. Elfrida immediately denied it, stating firmly that there was no truth to the claims. An unpleasant look crossed Misha's face as Elfrida continued speaking. She began by addressing the matter of the boy Misha had mentioned. Elfrida acknowledged that the boy was indeed living in their household, but she clarified that this decision had been made with the full approval of her husband, Lionel. The statement visibly shocked Misha. Elfrida continued explaining that the boy in question was hard-working and that even Lionel himself recognized the effort and dedication he had shown. Because of that, she argued that it would be unthinkable to ignore such talent simply because he was not born into nobility. She then reminded the audience that a butler serving a noble household must possess dignity and discipline. For that reason, the boy had undergone thorough training. Through that training, he had grown into someone worthy of serving within a royal household. With graceful composure, Elfrida asked the crowd not to speak poorly of their butler and concluded her explanation with a respectful bow. The hall fell into silence. Inside her mind, Misha was furious. The idea that Lionel himself had approved such a decision felt completely unacceptable to her. In her view, it was unimaginable that royalty would allow a commoner from such a background to serve in their household. Before the silence could settle, someone in the crowd raised another concern, questioning the accusation about theft. Another guest quickly added that theft was a serious crime regardless of social status. Elfrida began to respond to the accusation, but before she could finish speaking, another voice suddenly interrupted. Philon stepped forward and asked everyone to wait. Elfrida looked at him in surprise, calling his name. Philon apologized to her and asked for permission to explain the matter himself. Elfrida hesitated, unsure whether she should allow it. At that moment, Lionel gently placed a hand on her shoulder, silently stopping her from intervening. Understanding the gesture, Elfrida finally agreed to let Philon speak. As the tension in the hall continued to rise, one of the guests finally spoke up and asked if the young man standing before them was the butler being discussed. Philon confirmed that he was. He bowed deeply to the assembled nobles and apologized for causing them concern. After straightening himself, he began to explain his situation. He openly admitted that he had indeed come from the slums and that his family still lived there. In order to support them, he had done everything he could, and during those difficult years, he had endured countless moments of humiliation. Before he could continue further, Misha attempted to interrupt, as if ready to use his words against him. However, Philon immediately continued speaking, firmly declaring that despite his difficult past, he had never committed any crimes. He emphasized that he had never wanted to become like the corrupt nobles he had seen, those who filled their pockets through dishonest means. His bold words caused both Misha and the surrounding guests to fall silent for a moment. Philon went on to explain that within the country, there were indeed many nobles like those he described, but there were also countless people suffering in poverty, just like his own family. He then spoke with conviction about Lionel and Elfrida, declaring that they were the kind of people who could change the world. Swearing loyalty to the masters he respected, Philon boldly stated that the accusations being made by Lady Misha were nothing more than lies. Misha reacted angrily to the accusation. She scolded him for his rudeness and insisted that there was a limit to such baseless claims. According to her, there was no evidence anywhere proving that she had lied. At that moment, Elfrida stepped forward. With calm confidence, she declared that this was not true. The evidence proving Misha's wrongdoing was already in her possession. The statement immediately shocked Misha. As the tension in the hall reached its peak, the atmosphere suddenly shifted when someone from the crowd finally stepped forward. A noble lady spoke up and revealed that she had once witnessed Lady Misha assaulting a maid. She explained that when she had seen it happen, Misha had threatened to destroy her father's business if she dared to speak about it, forcing her to remain silent. Another person in the crowd followed, revealing a similar experience. This individual explained that Misha had once threatened to revoke their son's college admission unless they signed a contract she demanded. Soon, more voices joined in. One person after another admitted that they had also been threatened. Some even declared that they possessed evidence proving what had happened to them. For a moment, Misha stood speechless as the accusations rapidly multiplied around her. However, she quickly tried to regain control of the situation by dismissing all the claims as fabricated lies. Elfrida then stepped forward to address the crowd. She explained that the people speaking out were victims who had long been threatened by Lady Misha. Because the Tark family was one of the most powerful noble houses in the country, many people had been too afraid of retaliation to oppose her openly. For years, they had endured the situation in silence, fearing the consequences of speaking up. Elfrida then asked the gathered nobles whether the words of someone who had harmed so many people could truly be trusted. Encouraged by her words, another guest spoke out, urging others to examine the documents that had been brought forward as proof. Several pieces of evidence were shown, and some of the nobles inspecting them quickly noticed signs that the records had been manipulated. Realizing this, they began questioning Misha's accusations more openly, with some concluding that the earlier claim about Philon being a thief must also have been a lie. Meanwhile, Misha's expression stiffened as the situation spiraled out of her control. In her mind, she struggled to understand how everything had turned against her so suddenly. Just moments earlier, everything had been proceeding exactly as she intended. Now, the red-haired woman she despised had managed to corner her. Desperately, Misha searched for something, anything, that she could use to regain the upper hand. At that moment, Elfrida calmly announced that there was still one more thing she wished to show everyone. Lionel stepped forward and handed her the envelope he had been keeping hidden. The moment Misha saw the envelope, fear and panic flashed across her face. The reaction made it clear that she recognized it immediately. Holding the envelope in her hand, Elfrida remarked that it seemed Misha had seen it before. She then stated that it was time for Misha to confess and admit to the serious crime she had committed. Shaken, Misha demanded to know how Elfrida had obtained such knowledge. Elfrida then revealed a shocking truth to everyone present. She explained that not long ago, she had been poisoned and left hovering between life and death. The revelation sent waves of shock through the crowd. Continuing her explanation, Elfrida stated that the document inside the envelope contained the details related to that very incident. As she prepared to reveal it, Misha suddenly tried to stop her, shouting for her to wait. But Elfrida opened the letter and presented it to the assembled guests. The document, written by Misha herself, clearly contained instructions for carrying out the poisoning. The grand hall fell into stunned silence as the truth was finally revealed. Misha stood frozen, overwhelmed by shock and pressure as the evidence was placed before everyone. A strained sound escaped her as she struggled to process what had just happened. Elfrida remained composed and continued explaining the situation to the crowd. She revealed that the letter clearly stated it was supposed to be burned after being read. However, before that could happen, they had already secured the accomplice who received it, allowing them to recover the document safely. She calmly stated that this would be the final piece of evidence she would present. The gathered nobles read the letter. As its contents were revealed, waves of shock spread throughout the hall. Elfrida then addressed the guests, asking them directly whether anyone could still take Lady Misha's side after seeing such undeniable proof. One noble carefully compared the handwriting and soon declared that it perfectly matched the documents Misha had written before. Others began reacting loudly, their disbelief growing stronger with every passing moment. Some questioned how the powerful Tark family could be involved in attempted murder. Others admitted that they had always felt something dangerous about Misha, but had never dared to say it aloud. Voices rose throughout the hall as people demanded to know how she intended to take responsibility for such a crime. Misha stood in the center of the room, completely mortified as the crowd turned against her. At that moment, Lionel stepped forward and silenced the commotion. He firmly declared that the matter would be handled properly and that Lady Misha would explain everything in full at the knight's headquarters. Instead of calming down, Misha erupted in desperation. Her emotions spilled out uncontrollably as she questioned why everything had ended this way. In a bitter outburst, she confessed the reason behind her actions. She revealed that she had pushed herself relentlessly in order to gain Lionel's attention. She had worked tirelessly to make herself beautiful, worn dresses she never even liked, and denied herself the things she wanted just so she could become a woman worthy of standing beside him. Yet despite all that effort, Lionel had suddenly married someone else, a red-haired woman she believed to be nothing more than a symbol of misfortune. Unable to accept it, she demanded to know how such a thing could happen. Hearing this, Elfrida fell silent. Inside her mind, conflicting thoughts began to swirl. She realized that Misha truly believed beauty was everything, and that this belief had driven her further and further down a dark path. Because it had not been enough to eliminate Elfrida, Misha had continued escalating her actions until they became unforgivable. Elfrida knew that what Misha had done was undeniably evil, yet the confessions stirred memories she had long buried, memories from her previous life. She remembered the time when she had been known as Miss Sheena, someone who helped others become beautiful and pursue the people they loved. She could still recall encouraging someone who had finally gained the courage to confess their feelings after working hard to improve themselves. Back then, she had sincerely supported those efforts and celebrated their determination. Now, standing in the present, Elfrida felt the weight of those memories. A troubling question formed in her mind. If she had once supported people who struggled to become beautiful for love, did she truly have the right to condemn Misha completely? Faced with that dilemma, Elfrida found herself uncertain for the first time. She didn't know what she should do next. The grand hall remained heavy with tension as the aftermath of the revelation settled over the gathered nobles. Misha stood frozen in place, her composure completely shattered, while the crowd waited to see what would happen next. Lionel finally stepped forward and addressed her directly. With calm authority, he explained that he had never judged people based on their appearance. What mattered to him was a person's inner character. He openly declared his love for Elfrida, describing the qualities that had drawn him to her, her intelligence, her strong will, and the bold ideas she sometimes brought forward without hesitation. Those were the very things that had captured his heart. He continued by reminding Misha that Elfrida was not only his beloved wife, but also a member of the royal family. Because of that, the crime she had committed could not simply be overlooked. Even a powerful house like the Tark family would not be able to escape responsibility for harming someone of such standing. Lionel ended his words by making it clear that she needed to understand the seriousness of what she had done. Misha remained stunned as his words sank in. Tears slowly fell from her eyes, and she quietly acknowledged what he had said. At that moment, the doors of the grand hall suddenly burst open. A group of knights rushed inside, announcing their arrival and reporting to Lionel that they had come as ordered. Lionel immediately gave them instructions. He ordered the knights to take Misha into custody and to contact both the king and the head of the Tark family at once so the matter could be formally addressed. The knights saluted in response and quickly moved to escort Misha out of the ballroom. Surrounded by the guards, she was led away from the hall while the nobles watched in silence. With the immediate chaos finally ending, the atmosphere in the room slowly began to settle. Elfrida, however, remained quiet, still standing where she was as the weight of everything that had happened lingered in her mind. Noticing her silence, Lionel gently called out to her. He reassured her that everything was finally over and suggested that they return to their room to rest for the time being. Hearing his voice brought Elfrida back from her thoughts. She looked relieved and responded warmly, expressing her gratitude before agreeing to leave with him. The grand party eventually came to an end, though not in the elegant manner it had begun. Instead, it closed amid a storm of whispers, shock, and lingering tension among the nobles who had witnessed the dramatic downfall of Lady Misha. Following the incident, Misha was taken into custody and confined in a detention facility reserved for nobles. At the same time, the Tark estate was officially placed under investigation, and the authorities began examining the crimes connected to the powerful family. Meanwhile, life continued within Lionel and Elfrida's household. Phelon was allowed to remain in his position, and after the truth had been revealed, he was officially permitted to continue his work as their butler. The young man carried out his duties with renewed determination, serving the household cheerfully as the days passed. Later that evening, the atmosphere inside Lionel and Elfrida's private room was quiet. Elfrida sat silently, her mind drifting through the events that had unfolded. In her thoughts, she reflected on the outcome. For now, she had successfully avoided the tragic route that the original story had once followed. The danger that had loomed over her life had been prevented, at least for the time being. Yet another question began to surface in her mind. Now that her main objective had been accomplished, she wondered what would happen next. If she were honest with herself, she knew that there was no longer any real reason for her to continue the contractual marriage with Lionel. Their relationship had originally been based on mutual benefit, nothing more. Still, the idea of leaving immediately troubled her. If she were to disappear now, the very reason Lionel had entered the contract marriage in the first place would lose its meaning. That was not something she wanted to do to him. After thinking it through, she quietly reached a decision in her heart. When the heroine of the original story eventually appeared, that would be the moment for her to disappear quietly from Lionel's life. In her mind, that seemed like the best path for his future. While she was lost in these thoughts, Lionel suddenly spoke, asking if she was all right. His voice pulled her back to the present moment. Realizing she had been silent for some time, she explained that she had simply been lost in thought. Lionel then revealed something he had come to realize during the recent events. He admitted that their relationship had originally been nothing more than a mutually beneficial arrangement. However, when Elfrida had collapsed after being poisoned, his mind had gone completely blank. In that terrifying moment, he had realized just how deeply he feared losing her. Somewhere along the way, without him even noticing, she had become an irreplaceable part of his life. Hearing those words left Elfrida stunned. Lionel clenched his fists as he tried to continue speaking, clearly struggling with the emotions he wanted to express. But when he looked up and saw Elfrida's face, he suddenly froze and called her name again in surprise. Tears had begun streaming down her cheeks. Even Elfrida herself seemed confused by it. She questioned why she was crying and quickly tried to wipe the tears from her face. Before she could compose herself, Lionel suddenly stepped forward and pulled her into an embrace. The unexpected gesture left Elfrida completely shocked. Holding her gently, Lionel reassured her that if there was anything troubling her, he would make sure to remove it. If she felt dissatisfied with him for failing to protect her until now, he told her she had every right to end their contract. But above all, he pleaded with her not to cry. For a brief moment, Elfrida instinctively moved as if she were about to return the embrace. But just before her arms could close around him, she stopped herself. Instead, she quietly told him that she was all right and thanked him for his concern.